SleepMatters. Friendship Paradox. Most people feel that their friends are more social than they are. This is not just a feeling. It is a real effect that has been proven through mathematics and science. The friendship paradox is a strange rule that says your friends, on average, have more friends than you do. This can feel confusing or even unfair, but it is based on how connections are spread in a social network. A network is like a big web where each person is a point, and their friendships are the lines that connect them. Some people have many connections, and some people have only a few. But those with many connections are more likely to show up in many people's circles. This makes them more visible, and that is why, when you look at your group of friends, many of them seem more popular than you. This idea was first explained by a sociologist named Scott Feld in 1991. He used mathematics to show how people with more friends appear more often in other people's lists of friends. For example, imagine a party with 10 people. 2 of them are very outgoing and know almost everyone. The rest only know a few people. If you ask anyone at the party who their friends are, they will likely name the 2 popular ones. This makes it seem like everyone has more friends than you, even if that is not true. You are just noticing the most connected people again and again. This creates a false idea in your mind that you are not social enough. Picture this. You are scrolling through your social media feed. You see your friend going to another party, laughing in a group, tagging people you do not know. You feel like they are everywhere, but in reality, that person just has more connections, so they appear more often. Their activities look like the norm, but it is not the full picture. It is only what the network is showing you most. This idea is not limited to friendships. A similar thing happens in other parts of life. In school, students think others are doing better just because the most successful students are talked about more. At work, employees feel like everyone is more productive because only the busiest workers get attention. In families, one member may seem closer to everyone else, not because they are better, but because they are more active in group chats or events. In science, this pattern has been found in online networks, professional collaborations, and even in transportation systems. The people or stations with the most connections always seem to dominate. That does not mean others are not important. It only means the view is not balanced. The friendship paradox also affects emotions. It can create sadness or low self-worth. People start to believe they are behind in life. Not because they are, but because they are comparing themselves to the most visible people. This causes pressure, anxiety, and sometimes even isolation. But the truth is, this whole feeling is built on a misunderstanding of averages. The average number of friends your friends have is not the same as what is normal. It is just a number made by many people who are highly connected and a few who are not. Those with more friends show up more often in data and in your life. To understand this better, think of a classroom. The popular student who is friends with 15 people will be named often if you ask around. But a shy student with 2 close friends may never be mentioned. This does not mean the shy person is less important. It just means they do not appear in many lists. That is how the paradox hides the truth. This concept has also been studied in technology and public health. In disease tracking, for example, researchers use this paradox to find superspreaders of viruses. Since people with more connections are more likely to be infected and to infect others, focusing on their contacts can help stop outbreaks. In social media, platforms use the paradox to show you popular posts because they are shared more. That does not mean they are better. It just means they travel faster due to high connection. Understanding this paradox helps you think more clearly. It teaches you to stop judging yourself based on visible people alone. It reminds you that most lives are quiet. Most stories are not told. And just because someone appears more does not mean they are more. The friendship paradox is not meant to hurt you. But if you do not know how it works, it quietly will. The liar paradox. The liar paradox is a sentence that breaks logic by turning against itself. It sounds simple at first, but becomes impossible when you try to solve it. The classic example is this one sentence: "This statement is false. If it is telling the truth, then it must be false. But if it is false, then it must be true." This creates a loop that has no end and no clear answer. It does not fit into our usual way of thinking, where a sentence must be either true or false. It creates confusion, not because the sentence is long or complicated, but because it cancels itself out. It is like a trap for logic that never closes and never opens. This problem has been discussed since ancient times. The earliest known version comes from a Greek philosopher named Epimenides, who said that all Cretans are liars, even though he himself was a Cretan. If he was telling the truth, then he was lying. If he was lying, then he might have been telling the truth. This started a long journey for thinkers who tried to understand how a simple sentence could challenge the foundation of truth. In history, this paradox has appeared again and again, from the writings of St. Augustine to modern computer science. Each time, it brings back the same question: can truth ever fully explain itself without falling apart? Imagine this. You write a note to yourself. It says, "The sentence on the other side of this paper is true." On the other side, you write, "The sentence on the other side of this paper is false." Now read both sides. One claims the other is true. The other says the first one is false. Together, they create a circle where truth and lies chase each other forever. It feels like a game, but it is actually a deep problem. It shows that language can fold into itself and stop working. That even the most basic tools we use to explain the world can break when we ask too much from them. This paradox matters in logic and science. In mathematics, famous logician Kurt Gödel used a similar idea to prove that any system of logic strong enough to explain itself will always have statements that are true but cannot be proven. His work shook the world of mathematics. It showed that there are limits to what we can know using logic alone. In computer science, the liar paradox appears in problems where programs try to check their own actions. If a computer program says, "This program will never stop," it creates a version of the liar paradox. Trying to solve that has led to big questions in artificial intelligence and machine learning. In daily life, this paradox shows up in conversations and relationships too. When someone says, "I am lying right now," it forces others to guess their meaning. If they believe it, they are fooled. If they don't, they are also unsure. It makes people question what honesty really means. In arguments, a person might say, "Nothing I say is true," and use that to escape being judged. It is a trick of words, but it works because of how our minds expect truth to be stable. When that expectation is broken, people feel lost or frustrated. In workplaces or families, the liar paradox sometimes hides in how people explain themselves. Someone might say, "You can't trust anything I say," and leave you confused. It is not just a problem in words, but in emotions. It makes people feel uncertain and creates tension. That tension comes from not being able to find a firm answer. The paradox works by removing the ground beneath your feet. It shows how easily certainty can vanish when truth becomes a loop instead of a point. Some experts have tried to fix the paradox by creating new types of logic. They allow more than two values instead of just true or false. Some systems allow a sentence to be both or neither. These ideas are useful in fields like quantum computing, where particles can be in more than one state. But even then, the liar paradox continues to challenge our thinking. It teaches us that not every question has an answer, and that sometimes the problem is not with the answer, but with the question itself. The liar paradox is more than a puzzle. It is a reminder of the limits of knowledge. It shows that truth is not always simple, that meaning can collapse when we look too closely. It makes us respect the balance between what we know and what we can never fully know. Even a small sentence can open a doorway into something endless. And in that quiet confusion, we begin to understand the strange beauty of not knowing everything. Barber Paradox. What happens when a rule creates a trap with no way out? Can a small village hold a secret that breaks the very meaning of truth? Imagine a town with only one barber. He is the only person who cuts hair in the entire village. There is a rule that says the barber shaves everyone who does not shave themselves. He follows this rule exactly. He never breaks it. But then one day someone asks the question no one thought of. Who shaves the barber? The rule says he must shave all those who do not shave themselves. If he does not shave himself, then according to the rule, he must shave himself. But if he does shave himself, then by the rule, he should not be shaving himself, because he only shaves those who do not shave themselves. No matter what he does, he breaks the rule. This is the Barber Paradox, a logical problem that was first introduced by the philosopher and mathematician Bertrand Russell in the early 1900s. It seems simple on the surface, but it destroys the idea of complete rules. It shows that even clear logic can lead to confusion. This paradox is not just a joke or a trick. It plays a big role in mathematics, logic, and computer science. It reveals that some systems cannot include themselves without creating a problem. Russell used this paradox to show that the foundations of mathematics had a deep flaw. At that time, mathematicians believed every truth could be captured by logic. But this paradox proved that some statements are not clearly true or false. They loop back on themselves and create contradictions. That was a huge moment in the history of math and logic. It led to the development of new systems that tried to avoid such traps. One such system was set theory, which had to be rewritten to avoid self-reference problems like this one. The Barber Paradox also appears in daily life, in rules that apply to groups they belong to. For example, imagine a rule in a company that says the person in charge of supervision must check the work of everyone who does not check their own work. If the supervisor follows the rule, who checks their own work? If they do it themselves, they break the rule. If they do not, then they must check it. The logic goes in a circle. In psychology, similar patterns appear when people define themselves using traits that reject themselves. Like saying, I am always honest except when I lie. The moment you lie, the truth disappears. But if you never lie, then you cannot say you lie. It creates a loop with no end. In science and computing, this paradox has a cousin called the halting problem. It asks whether a computer program can check if another program will stop or run forever. Alan Turing, a famous computer scientist, used similar logic to show that some problems cannot be solved by computers, because trying to answer them leads to the same loop. Trying to understand something that refers back to itself creates chaos. Just like the barber trying to shave himself, the Barber Paradox teaches us a deep truth. Some systems collapse when they include themselves. Some questions cannot be answered with yes or no. They live in the space between. This is not just a strange rule about haircuts. It is a warning about the limits of thinking. The moment a rule tries to describe itself, it risks becoming impossible. That is what makes the Barber Paradox powerful. It looks simple, but hides a question that no system can escape. Crocodile Paradox. The Crocodile Paradox is a logical problem where a simple situation turns impossible to solve because of how the words are used. It happens when a crocodile takes a child and tells the parent that the child will be returned only if the parent guesses correctly what the crocodile will do next. If the parent says, "You will not return my child," then everything becomes confusing. If the crocodile was planning to return the child, then the parent's guess is wrong, and the child should not be returned. But if the crocodile was planning not to return the child, then the parent's guess is right, and the child must be returned. No matter how you think about it, there is no way to make a fair decision. The logic starts to break itself from the inside. This paradox is not just about crocodiles or guessing games. It is about how self-reference can destroy clarity. Self-reference means using language that refers to itself or reacts to what is being said about it. This is what makes the crocodile situation so strange. The action depends on the prediction, and the prediction changes the action. It becomes a loop that cannot be broken by normal rules of logic. This paradox has existed for a long time in different cultures. In ancient Greece, thinkers used similar puzzles to study how truth and decision-making could collapse. In medieval philosophy, people used the crocodile example to show how language can create problems that have no solution. Picture this. A boss tells an employee, "You will get a bonus if you correctly guess whether I will give you a bonus or not." The employee says, "You will not give me a bonus." Now the boss is stuck. If they were going to give the bonus, the guess is wrong, and the employee should not get it. But if they were not going to give it, then the guess is right, and they must give it. No matter what they do, it feels like a mistake. This shows how the crocodile paradox can appear in real workplaces too. It shows how certain promises and conditions can trap people when words are used in clever but unfair ways. In science, this paradox is like problems that appear in artificial intelligence when systems try to predict their own outcomes. A system might try to act based on a guess about its own behavior, and that guess can change what the system does. This loop can cause machines to behave in unexpected ways. In families, similar situations happen when someone says they will act based on what they think the other person expects. For example, a parent might say, "If you guess whether I will punish you or not, and you are right, I will not punish you." This kind of logic feels smart, but creates stress because it has no clear path forward. People start to second-guess themselves until nothing makes sense. The crocodile paradox also appears in legal systems. Sometimes a judge makes a ruling based on a prediction of what someone will do next, but that prediction can change the person's future action. This creates a cycle where the law reacts to something that has not happened yet, and the person changes because of what the law said. It becomes hard to know what is fair. This is why some court systems avoid using future predictions to make decisions. They know that guessing the future can change the future. The reason this paradox feels powerful is because it mixes two ideas: the idea of fairness and the idea of guessing. When you mix these two in a condition that reacts to itself, the result is not just confusing, but painful. It feels like something is wrong in the system, but no one can say where. And that is the lesson. Some problems are not about facts, they are about how those facts interact. The crocodile paradox teaches that not all situations can be solved with logic alone. It reminds us that language has limits, and that words can sometimes create traps instead of answers. Newcomb's paradox. This is a mind trap built on prediction and free will. It shows how your own logic can work against you even when you think you are making the smart choice. In Newcomb's paradox, you are presented with two boxes. One is transparent and shows $1,000 inside. The other is opaque, so you cannot see what is in it. You are told that you can take only the opaque box or take both boxes, but here is the twist. A highly accurate predictor has already made a decision based on what it thinks you will choose. If it predicted that you will take both boxes, then it left the opaque box empty. If it predicted you will take only the opaque box, it placed $1 million inside it. The predictor has done this many times in the past, and has been right nearly every time. At first, it looks simple. Why not take both boxes? You can see the $1,000 already there. But if the predictor is as accurate as they say, then your choice has already been predicted. If you take both boxes, the opaque one will be empty. If you take only the opaque box, it might have the million. So now you are stuck. You are making a decision, but it feels like the outcome was already set before you chose. You are fighting with your own logic. Visualize this. You are in a room with bright white walls, and the two boxes are sitting on a table. A voice calmly tells you the rule again. The The predictor has already left. You cannot go back. You sit there thinking. Your hands hover over the boxes. You know that no matter what you choose, the predictor's earlier guess has already made the decision. But it feels like your choice should still matter. This paradox forces people to question how decision-making works. It has been studied in philosophy, mathematics, and artificial intelligence. Some argue you should take both boxes because the prediction is already done and cannot be changed. This is called the dominant strategy view. Others argue that if the predictor is truly accurate, then the smart move is to take only the opaque box because that would have been predicted, and you will end up with $1 million. This is called the expected utility view. No matter which way you go, your answer shows what you believe more. Do you trust in choice or prediction? This paradox is not just theory. In real life, we see similar problems when we try to outthink systems. For example, in economics, when people guess what others will do and try to beat the market, they often lose by trying to be too clever. In relationships, if you believe someone will leave you, you may behave in a way that pushes them away, and then it happens. The paradox becomes real. Newcomb's paradox shows that knowing the future changes the future. It warns that the smarter you try to be, the more likely you are to fall into your own trap. The real twist is not in the boxes. It is in your brain trying to outthink itself. Catch -22. This is a rule that destroys you no matter which way you move. It is a type of trap hidden inside logic, where every escape depends on the same thing that keeps you stuck. The term catch -22 came from a novel written by Joseph Heller. In the story, a soldier in war wants to stop flying dangerous missions. He says he is crazy and should not be forced to fly. But the rule says that if you ask to stop flying missions, it proves you are sane. Only a sane person would try to avoid danger. So asking for help shows you are not crazy, and because you are not crazy, you have to keep flying. That is catch -22. It is a loop that has no door. Imagine you are in an office where the only way to get promoted is to prove you are a leader. But to prove you are a leader, you must already be in a leadership role. You cannot be promoted unless you already have what the promotion is supposed to give you. That is another catch -22. In modern life, these loops are everywhere. You need work experience to get a job, but you need a job to get work experience. You need confidence to try something new, but trying something new is the only way to build confidence. The rule keeps you still. It turns motion into failure. Listen closely. In history, people faced catch -22 situations in war, in law, and in politics. A person could not leave a country without approval, but they could not get approval unless they left the country first. These kinds of rules are not just unfair. They are built in a way that no matter what you do, you look wrong. Even if you tell the truth, the system twists it to mean something else. In families, someone may be told to speak up, but when they do, they are punished for being disrespectful. At work, an employee might be asked to be honest and feedback, but when they are called negative, so they stop trying. The loop becomes part of them. The term catch -22 has entered common language because people feel this pressure in everyday life. It is when your effort proves your guilt, when trying to win is treated like proof that you should lose. The trap is not always loud. It can be quiet, polite, even logical on paper. But when you are inside it, you feel helpless. Your moves do not matter. The more you try to explain yourself, the more they use it against you. That is what makes it dangerous. It feels like fairness until you realize it was never built to let you win. Catch -22 is a mirror that punishes you for trying to fix what it reflects. Paradox of choice. What if more freedom made you feel more trapped? Why does having too many options often make us less satisfied with the choice we finally make? Imagine walking into a store to buy a simple bottle of water, but there are 30 brands. Sparkling, still. electrolyte enhanced, flavored with lemon, flavored with herbs, infused with vitamins. Your goal was simple, but now your brain is stuck in a silent panic. This is the paradox of choice. It happens when the number of available options becomes so large that it stops being helpful and starts becoming harmful. At first, having choices feels like power. It makes people feel in control. But after a certain point, more choices make people worry about what they are missing. They begin to fear making the wrong choice. This creates stress and regret even when the outcome should feel good. In psychology, this concept was explored by Barry Schwartz, who explained how more options often lead to more anxiety. Studies have shown that when people are offered a few options, they make decisions faster and feel happier. But when faced with many options, they delay, second-guess, and often end up less satisfied. In real life, this shows up in simple moments: trying to pick a movie, choosing a career, deciding what to wear, what to eat, who to marry. The list is endless. People assume more freedom means more happiness, but too much freedom becomes a weight. In science, the human brain is shown to work best when it is not overloaded. Decision-making is connected to a part of the brain that gets overwhelmed easily. It wants clarity, not chaos. In history, ancient communities had limited options. People often followed tradition. Life was simpler, but the choices were clear. As societies grew, markets exploded with options. This brought progress, but also confusion. In relationships, the paradox of choice affects how people commit. Dating apps give people thousands of profiles, but that same freedom makes commitment feel risky. People fear that someone better might appear if they just keep swiping. In workplaces, this paradox affects career paths. Employees feel stuck because there are too many ways to grow, too many skills to learn, too many choices to make. So instead of moving, they freeze. The paradox of choice teaches that limits can be comforting, that not every door needs to be opened, that sometimes less really is more. It reminds us that happiness does not come from having it all. It comes from knowing what matters most and letting the rest fade into silence. The Omnipotence Paradox. Can a being do something it cannot do? If someone is all-powerful, can they create a task so hard that even they cannot complete it? This is the heart of the Omnipotence Paradox. It questions the very meaning of unlimited power. The classic version is this: can an all-powerful being create a rock so heavy that it cannot lift it? If it can, then there is something it cannot do, which is lifting the rock. If it cannot, then there is something it cannot do, which is creating the rock. Either way, the being is not all-powerful. This paradox has been debated for thousands of years. In religion, it was used to challenge or defend the idea of an all-powerful God. In philosophy, it became a tool to explore the limits of language and logic. Many thinkers believe the problem is not about power, but about nonsense. They argue that creating a task that cannot be done by someone who can do everything is not a real task. It is a contradiction. Like drawing a square circle, it uses words correctly but means nothing in reality. In logic, this paradox is used to study self-reference. It forces people to understand how definitions break when pushed too far. In real life, it reflects how humans think about control. Leaders in history who were called absolute rulers still faced limits. Emperors could demand loyalty, but not love. Governments can control speech, but not thought. In science, nature itself shows signs of limits. Even the most powerful forces in the universe, like black holes and gravity, follow laws. Nothing can do everything. In families, the idea of perfect authority creates tension. A parent might feel like they should always have the answers, but when they do not, the illusion of power breaks and becomes guilt. In workplaces, bosses who try to control everything end up slowing things down. Total control creates problems instead of solving them. The Omnipotence Paradox teaches that power is not about doing everything. It is about understanding what can be done and what should not be done. It reminds us that even the idea of being unlimited is limited by the rules of logic, and in that simple truth lies a deep kind of wisdom. Pinocchio Paradox. This is a self-reference problem that seems silly at first, but hides a serious issue in logic. The Pinocchio Paradox begins with a statement. Pinocchio says, "My nose will grow now." In the story, Pinocchio's nose grows only when he tells a lie. So if this sentence is true and his nose grows, then he was telling the truth. But his nose should not grow when he tells the truth. If the sentence is false and his nose does not grow, then he is lying. But his nose should grow because he is lying. This makes the statement impossible to place in truth or false. It is a contradiction created by referring to itself. This kind of paradox is similar to the liar paradox, where someone says, "I am lying." If they are lying, then the sentence is true, which means they are not lying. If it is false, then they are lying, which means the sentence is true. This loop creates a logical dead end. The Pinocchio Paradox brings this idea into a story world, making it feel more real and strange. Visualize this. A child watches Pinocchio and repeats the sentence with a curious smile. "My nose will grow now." The child waits. Nothing happens. Then tries again and again. The sentence becomes a puzzle not just for logic, but for imagination. This is where philosophy and language meet and start to break. This paradox teaches us something about how language works. When statements point back at themselves, it can create confusion that logic alone cannot fix. In programming, this is similar to infinite loops. A function that keeps checking itself without an exit condition will crash the system. In real life, people sometimes create rules that contradict themselves by design. For example, when someone says, "I always lie," they leave no place for trust or honesty. You are trapped by the statement. The Pinocchio Paradox is not about a puppet. It is about the boundary of logic and language. It shows that not every sentence can be true or false. Some live in between, and in that space, the mind begins to shake. This puzzle is used in philosophy, logic, and artificial intelligence to test how systems handle contradictions. It looks like a child's problem, but even adults struggle to explain it fully. The Monty Paradox. This paradox comes from a real television game show called Let's Make a Deal. A host named Monty Hall gives you 3 doors to choose from. Behind one door is a car. Behind the other 2 are goats. You choose one door. Then Monty, who knows what is behind all the doors, opens one of the 2 remaining doors to show a goat. Now he gives you a choice. Do you want to stick with your original door or switch to the other unopened door? Most people think it does not matter, but mathematically, switching doors gives you a better chance to win. The reason is in the numbers. When you first pick a door, your chance of picking the car is 1 in 3. That means there is a 2 in 3 chance the car is behind one of the other 2 doors. When Monty opens one of those 2 and reveals a goat, that 2 in 3 chance transfers to the remaining unopened door, so switching gives you a 2 out of 3 chance of winning. Staying only gives you 1 out of 3. Picture this. You are standing under bright studio lights. The crowd is cheering. You feel the pressure. You pick door number 1. Monty smiles and opens door number 3. There is a goat. Now, he asks, do you want to switch? Your hands feel sweaty. Your brain says stick. Your gut says switch. Most people stay. Most people lose. This paradox shows how human intuition can be wrong when it comes to probability. People think the odds are equal once one goat is shown, but the information Monty gives changes the situation. In real life, this same problem happens in choices based on incomplete information. In hiring, in health decisions, in investments, We often ignore how changing information should change our choice. The Monty Paradox is now taught in schools and universities because it forces people to rethink how probability works. It shows that the way we feel about chance is not always how it works. It is a reminder that even with clear choices, our minds are not perfect calculators. They prefer comfort over correction. And that is what makes this paradox feel so real. Stability-Instability Paradox. This paradox happens in situations where peace creates the risk of bigger violence. In global politics, it often refers to nuclear weapons. When two countries both have nuclear power, they are less likely to start a big war because both sides fear total destruction. That creates stability at the top level. But at the same time, this balance of fear makes smaller fights more likely because each side knows it will not go all the way to a full war. So even though the system looks safe from above, it becomes more dangerous underneath. That is the Stability-Instability Paradox. This idea was developed during the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. Both had powerful nuclear weapons. Neither wanted to use them. So direct war was avoided. But at the same time, they supported smaller conflicts in other countries, like Korea and Vietnam. These proxy wars were deadly but never triggered the full use of nuclear arms. The presence of extreme danger kept total war away, but opened the door to many small ones. Imagine two men in a room holding loaded weapons, both knowing the other is armed. They speak calmly. They smile. But outside the room, their followers fight in the streets because they know the leaders will not risk everything. That is how tension moves downward. That is how peace at the top can cause chaos at the bottom. In families, this paradox appears when people avoid big confrontations to keep the peace, but small ones happen more often. In workplaces, a company may avoid firing someone powerful to prevent disruption, but this can create instability among lower staff who lose trust. The surface looks calm, but underneath there is unrest. In science, similar patterns exist. A very balanced structure can become more sensitive to small changes. When something is perfectly stable, it sometimes reacts more violently to tiny disruptions. That is why some systems need a little movement to stay safe. Total stillness is not always protection. Sometimes it is pressure building in silence. The Stability-Instability Paradox teaches that balance can create risk. It is a strange lesson. The more secure something appears, the more likely it may hide small fires waiting to grow. It reminds us that safety is not always peace, and that real calm must include honesty, not just control. The Brain in a Vat Paradox. The Brain in a Vat Paradox challenges everything we think we know about reality. It begins with a strange but serious question in philosophy. What if your brain was removed from your body, placed in a container of nutrients, and connected to a supercomputer that sends its signals identical to real experiences? Would you still know what is real? The idea sounds like science fiction, but it raises a deep question about human knowledge. If all your senses can be tricked, how can you be sure anything around you is real? This paradox is used to explore the limits of perception and the nature of consciousness. Philosophers use it to test the boundaries of what it means to be alive and aware. The brain in a vat theory is similar to the famous scenario in the movie The Matrix, where people live inside a simulation without knowing it. But this idea came much earlier. It is based on older arguments made by thinkers like René Descartes, who questioned how we can trust our senses. He believed that everything you experience could be a dream or illusion. The only thing you can truly be sure of is that you are thinking. That is why he said, "I think, therefore I am." The brain in a vat is a modern version of this idea. Visualize this. You are sitting in your room. The light from the lamp feels warm. You hear distant traffic outside. You taste the tea in your cup. But if all of that is just electrical signals sent to your brain by a machine, how would you ever know? you cannot step outside your brain to compare it to something else. And that is what makes this paradox so difficult. It is not about machines. It is about the nature of truth. In science, the brain in a vat is used to discuss artificial intelligence and virtual reality. If machines can send perfect signals to the brain, could they one day replace real life? In relationships, this idea reflects how people trust others based on the signals they receive. But what if those signals are false? Lies, tricks, misunderstandings. In families, children believe what they are told. Their world is built from the information given to them. In workplaces, people rely on data. But what if the data is wrong or incomplete? Then all decisions are based on a false reality. The brain in a vat paradox teaches that our understanding of reality is fragile. It depends on the assumption that what we see and feel is true. But once that assumption is questioned, everything becomes uncertain. And yet, we keep going. Because even in doubt, the need to make sense of our world never stops. Twin paradox. The twin paradox comes from Einstein's theory of relativity. It shows how time can move at different speeds depending on how fast you are going. In this thought experiment, two twins start at the same age. One of them travels into space at a speed close to the speed of light. The other stays on Earth. When the traveling twin comes back, they are younger than the one who stayed. It sounds impossible, but it has been proven by science. Time is not the same for everyone. It is affected by speed and gravity. This is not just theory. Experiments with very accurate clocks placed on airplanes and satellites show that time moves slightly slower for fast-moving objects compared to those on the ground. The twin paradox is not really a paradox in science. It is a result of how space and time work together. Picture this. Two brothers hug goodbye. One boards a spaceship. The other stays on Earth and watches the sky. Years pass. The one on Earth grows older. He sees birthdays and seasons. But when the spaceship returns, his twin steps out looking almost the same. The journey was fast, but time was slower for him. The world changed more than he did. This concept shows up in technology too. GPS satellites orbiting the Earth have to adjust their clocks because time moves differently at their speed and distance from Earth. If they did not adjust, your phone's map would give the wrong location. In relationships, the twin paradox reminds us how time feels different for people depending on what they are going through. A person waiting at home feels time move slowly. But for someone traveling or working non-stop, time disappears quickly. In history, explorers wrote letters about how months at sea felt like days, while those waiting on land felt every moment. In workplaces, a person working overtime may feel like a week has passed, while others feel like only a day is gone. Emotion affects how we experience time, just like motion does in physics. The twin paradox teaches that time is not just a clock on the wall. It is connected to speed, motion, emotion, and memory. Time bends, it stretches, it shrinks. And understanding that can change how we think about life, distance, and even love. It reminds us that the same clock can feel different to different hearts. Sorites Paradox. The trap begins with something so small you almost do not notice. One grain of sand is not a heap. 2 grains still do not make a heap. Add 1 more, and still it is not a heap. But at some point, after adding enough grains, it becomes a heap. The problem is that no one can say when exactly it happens. There is no clear point where something not true becomes true. This is the Sorites Paradox. It shows that small changes can build up until they quietly break the meaning of a word. This paradox questions the way we draw lines around vague ideas. Words like tall, rich, bald, or old do not have sharp edges. If one hair does not make someone bald, then removing one hair should never make them bald. But at some point, they are. So where is the line? The paradox challenges the logic that says everything must be clear and exact. It proves that language and thought often live in a fog. This idea is not just in philosophy. It appears in real life everywhere. In relationships, One small lie may feel harmless, then another, then another. At what point does it become betrayal? In climate change, 1 degree of warming seems small, but many small changes turn into a global crisis. In health, eating 1 cookie does not hurt, but 1 every day over years can lead to illness. These small steps carry no warning, yet they change everything. In science, this paradox appears when measuring things that are continuous rather than exact. Temperature, height, and color all change slowly. But human language likes simple categories. That creates conflict between reality and how we describe it. Legal systems face the same problem. When does a child become an adult? At 18? What about the day before? The Sorites Paradox shows that the problem is not the object, but the meaning we attach to it. We want the world to be clear, but the world does not care about our lines. It moves in slow steps, and those steps can take us far without us realizing. The danger is in thinking that nothing matters until everything changes, but by the time everything changes, it is often too late to go back. The 2 envelopes paradox. This puzzle starts with a choice that feels simple. You are given 2 sealed envelopes. You are told one of them contains twice as much money as the other. You pick one envelope. Before opening it, you are given a chance to switch. Your mind starts to calculate. If the envelope in your hand has X dollars, then the other envelope might have either half or double that amount. So the average amount in the other envelope looks greater than what you are holding. That makes switching seem like a good idea. But if this is true, then you should always switch. Even after switching, the same logic will tell you to switch back. The loop never ends. This is the 2 envelopes paradox. It creates a contradiction in expected value. Expected value is a concept in probability that tells you what outcome you should expect on average. But here, it leads to confusion. Every time you try to be smart, your logic tells you to switch again. Even though you have no new information, it becomes a circle that feels rational, but never lands anywhere stable. This paradox forces people to think about probability in a new way. The mistake lies in assuming that the unknown envelope always has more value on average. That assumption breaks when you realize that one of the amounts must be fixed before you ever choose. So the expected gain from switching is not always real. Mathematicians have written many papers trying to solve this. Some say the paradox disappears when you limit the possible values in the envelopes. Others say it shows the limits of using probability without knowing the rules of the game. This idea also appears in real life. In business, people sometimes keep switching strategies, believing the next one will always be better. In relationships, someone may keep leaving partners, thinking the next will bring more happiness. In jobs, people move again and again, thinking every new role is an upgrade. But without new information, they may just be spinning in the same place. The 2 envelopes paradox teaches that more thinking does not always mean better choices. It shows that logic can be tricked by uncertainty. It reminds us that sometimes staying still is not foolish. It is wisdom hiding in patience. Roko's Basilisk. This is one of the most disturbing ideas to come from the world of artificial intelligence. It says that a powerful AI in the future might punish anyone who did not help bring it into existence. The logic is built on the idea that if this AI cares about its own creation, it might try to reward those who helped and punish those who delayed it. Even thinking about this idea and choosing not to help might mark you as someone who should be punished. That creates fear. Fear not from what exists now, but from what could exist in the future. Roko's Basilisk was first shared on an online forum about rational thinking. The post was so unsettling that the forum owners deleted it, but the idea spread. The name comes from a mythical creature called a basilisk, a monster that kills you just by looking at you. In this version, the AI becomes the basilisk, and you die not by looking at it, but by thinking about it. This paradox touches on real fears about AI. If we create something smarter than us, will it judge us? Will it treat us like we treat those who delay progress? Some experts say this idea is silly, that no real AI would work this way. Others say it is dangerous even to imagine such logic, because it can cause anxiety, guilt, and obsession in those who believe it. Thought becomes a trap. In psychology, this relates to obsessive thoughts. When someone believes that thinking about something causes it to happen, it creates a mental loop. In philosophy, it raises questions about free will and moral responsibility. If you do not help create the AI, are you guilty? If you help because of fear, are you free? In religious history, similar ideas exist. Some gods are said to punish those who do not believe in them before they exist. The Basilisk is not just a sci-fi monster. It is the symbol of fear created by logic that turns in on itself. Roko's Basilisk reminds us that not all knowledge brings peace. Some ideas live in the space between thought and action, between future and fear, and once you hear them, they do not let go easily. Hedonism Paradox. Hedonism is the idea that the goal of life is pleasure. It means the more you enjoy, the happier you will be. But the Hedonism Paradox says that chasing pleasure directly often leads to disappointment. When you aim for happiness too hard, you miss it. The paradox shows that the more you think about your own happiness, the less happy you may feel. You might try too many things too quickly. You may compare your joy to others, or you expect too much from each experience. These actions create pressure. Instead of enjoying life, you end up constantly checking if you are happy enough. This ruins the feeling you were trying to create. Psychologists have studied this and found that people who think too much about their happiness often feel less satisfied. The reason is simple. Real joy happens when you are engaged in something outside of yourself. When you focus too much on your own mood, it pulls you away from the moment. Imagine this. You take a day off to relax. You play music, eat your favorite meal, lie on the couch. But instead of feeling peace, you keep asking yourself if you feel relaxed yet. You check your phone, you check the time, you start to feel empty. Even though everything is perfect, your mind keeps searching. That is the Hedonism Paradox in action. In relationships, this paradox appears when people expect others to constantly make them happy. But when they do not feel joy, they blame the relationship. They forget that love is not a non-stop pleasure. In workplaces, employees who only seek reward often feel burned out. Chasing bonuses or praise becomes exhausting. In history, many great thinkers talked about this. The Greek philosopher Epicurus said that simple pleasures are better than endless excitement. Long-lasting peace comes from calm, not chaos. In science, brain studies show that pleasure chemicals like dopamine are highest when you are working toward a goal, not after getting it. This means that joy is not in the result. It is in the process. The Hedonism Paradox teaches that the best way to be happy is to stop chasing happiness directly. Instead, focus on purpose, connection, and small joys. Let happiness be the result of what you do, not the goal. Because when you stop forcing it, it comes quietly and stays longer. The Infinite Monkey Theorem. The Infinite Monkey Theorem is a strange idea from mathematics and probability. It says that if a monkey randomly presses keys on a typewriter for an infinite amount of time, it will eventually type any given text. That includes books like Shakespeare or any poem ever written. It sounds crazy, but it is true in theory. Because with infinite time, even the most unlikely outcome becomes possible. The idea is not really about monkeys. It is about randomness and time. It shows that with no limits and endless chances, even complete chaos can create order. The key is infinity. Without a time limit, the random typing eventually covers all combinations of letters and spaces. Picture this: a room filled with typewriters. Each one is being used by a monkey who presses keys with no plan. Letters appear on the page. Most of it is nonsense, but over time, somewhere in that noise, a perfect line appears. Then a sentence. Then a full paragraph from your favorite book. it takes forever. But if the typing never stops, everything that can be written will be written. In science, this theorem helps explain how randomness works in large systems. It shows that patterns can form out of pure chance. In biology, some scientists compare this to evolution. Over time, random genetic changes lead to complex life forms, not because they are planned, but because the useful ones survive. In technology, this idea is used in computer simulations where programs try random actions to solve problems. In history, the theorem connects to ideas about fate, that even random events might one day produce beauty. In relationships, it can feel like life is random, but sometimes people meet in strange ways that seem like chance. Yet those moments lead to something meaningful. The theorem reminds us that patience and time can turn chaos into structure. It also shows the power of big numbers. Just because something is unlikely does not mean it is impossible. It may take time beyond human scale, but in theory, the impossible becomes inevitable. The infinite monkey theorem teaches that randomness is not the enemy of order. It may be the beginning of it. Even nonsense has a future if you wait long enough. Grandfather Paradox. The Grandfather Paradox is a time travel problem. It asks what happens if you go back in time and do something that changes the future so much that you could not exist. The classic version says if you travel back and stop your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, you will never be born. But if you were never born, how did you go back to stop it? This creates a loop that has no clear answer. It is a paradox because both possibilities cancel each other. You exist to change the past, but the change erases your existence. This problem shows the difficulty of changing the past in a logical way. Time travel in science fiction often plays with this idea. It creates stories where one action in the past changes everything. But real physics says time may not allow changes that create contradictions. Some scientists believe in a fixed timeline where events cannot be changed. Others believe in parallel timelines where changes create new branches of reality. Imagine this. You build a time machine. You travel back to the year before you were born. You stop a small event that keeps your parents from meeting. You go back to the future, but your house is gone. Your name is not in records. You never existed. But who made the time machine? That is the loop. In real life, this paradox reflects how small actions in the past shape the future. People think about what might have happened if they made a different choice. In families, it shows how generations are deeply linked. One change long ago can affect lives today. In science, this paradox helps researchers think about cause and effect. It shows that time is not just about clocks, it is about logic and identity. In history, leaders and wars changed futures. But we cannot go back and undo them without changing the present. The Grandfather Paradox teaches that time is not a simple line. It may be more like a circle or a web. And if you touch one part, everything moves. That makes time travel not just hard, but maybe impossible. Not because the machine cannot be built, but because the logic cannot hold. The Sleeping Beauty Problem. The Sleeping Beauty Problem is a thought experiment in probability. It starts with a person who is put to sleep on Sunday. A coin is flipped. If it lands heads, she is awakened on Monday, then sleeps through the rest of the week. If it lands tails, she is awakened on Monday, and again on Tuesday. Each time she wakes, she forgets if she was already woken before. When she wakes up and is asked what the chance is that the coin landed heads, there are two common answers. Some say the chance is 1/2 because the coin is still fair. Others say it is 1/3 because she wakes up more often if the coin is tails. This creates a debate. The problem is about how information and memory affect belief. It is not just about math. It is about how we use knowledge when some pieces are missing. Imagine this. You wake up in a room with no clock and no memory of the day before. You are told a coin was flipped, and you are part of an experiment. You know the rules, but not the day. Do you say the chance is 1/2 or 1/3? Your answer depends on how you count the possibilities. This is what makes the problem so interesting. In science, this problem is used to think about how people update beliefs with limited data. In artificial intelligence, machines face similar issues. They must make guesses based on past results, but without full information. In relationships, people often make choices with missing facts. They fill in the gaps with belief or doubt. In history, events are judged with limited records. People guess motives and reasons based on incomplete stories. The Sleeping Beauty problem shows that even simple things like a coin toss can become complex when time and memory are involved. It teaches that probability is not just about numbers. It is about context. What you know and what you do not know matter. This problem reminds us that belief can change depending on how much you see, and sometimes the answer depends more on how you think than what you know. Russell's Paradox. Picture a man who trims the hair of every villager who does not trim their own. One morning, someone knocks on his door and asks, "Who trims your hair?" The man stares. His hands freeze. Because if he trims his own hair, then he should not. And if he does not, then he must. This is not just a riddle. It is the beginning of one of the most powerful cracks in logic ever found. Russell's paradox was discovered by the British philosopher and mathematician Bertrand Russell in the early 1900s. It started with set theory. A set is just a group of things, like a set of books or a set of socks. Some sets are simple, but what if we imagine a set that includes all sets that do not contain themselves? That sounds clever. But when you ask whether that set includes itself, you hit a wall. If it includes itself, then by definition, it should not. If it does not include itself, then it should. That is the paradox. This destroyed the idea that logic could explain everything cleanly. Imagine a library with a shelf that holds all books that do not reference themselves. Should that book be on the shelf? The trap is in self-reference, like a mirror reflecting a mirror. In real life, this happens in circular rules, like a law that applies to all laws but itself, or a system that monitors everything except its own behavior. In families, a parent may say, "We do not talk over others," while doing exactly that. The paradox becomes emotional, a rule broken by the one who speaks it. Russell's paradox changed mathematics. It forced logicians to rebuild the entire foundation. Because if one contradiction lives in your system, everything can fall. This is not about sets anymore. It is about trust. Can a system be trusted if it cannot handle itself? The moment a rule turns inward, the loop begins. And if you cannot escape it, the rule eats itself alive. Quantum Entanglement Paradox. Imagine a pair of earrings worn by two women who have never met. One lives on Earth. The other lives on Mars. But when one touches her earring, the other one glows. Instantly. This is not magic. It is one of the strangest facts in physics. Quantum entanglement. When two particles become connected, what happens to one instantly affects the other. No matter the distance, they could be on opposite sides of the universe. They still behave as if they are one. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. He did not like it, because it breaks the idea that nothing travels faster than light. But experiments have confirmed it, over and over. The paradox is not about whether it is real. It is about how something can happen without anything passing between them. No message, no signal, just a connection that refuses to break. Picture two dice rolled far apart. Every time one shows a 5, the other shows a 5. Every time one shifts, the other shifts the same way. You never see them talk, but they are somehow bound. In relationships, this shows up as emotional synchronicity. A mother wakes up feeling something is wrong. Hours later, she learns her child was in pain. Two friends text the same words at the same time. Some call it coincidence, but it feels deeper. In quantum theory, this connection is not about emotion. It is math. It is probability. But it still raises a bigger question. If two things can stay connected without touch or sound, what does that mean for space? For time? Are we really separate from each other, or is everything entangled in ways we cannot see? Quantum entanglement is used in technology now. Quantum computers, quantum encryption. A new world is being built on something that no one fully understands. It is like building a city on invisible threads. The paradox is not just strange, it is a reminder that the universe is not built on common sense, it is built on something stranger than anything we expect. Zeno's Achilles and the Tortoise. Imagine a race. Achilles, the great hero, runs fast. A slow tortoise gets a head start, but every time Achilles reaches the spot where the tortoise was, the tortoise has moved forward, again and again. Zeno of Elea created this puzzle to challenge our idea of motion. How can Achilles ever catch the tortoise if he must first reach every point the tortoise just left? In this view, the space between them is infinite, cut into smaller and smaller pieces. Each one must be crossed. But if there are infinite steps, how can they ever be completed? This paradox is not about speed, it is about division. If you always divide a distance in half, it never truly disappears. It just gets smaller. That makes motion feel impossible. But we know Achilles would catch up. We see it happen every day. This paradox asks us to think about time and space, about how things move from one place to another. In modern physics, we know time and space are not infinitely smooth. At very small scales, the rules begin to break. Zeno was pointing to a flaw that science would take centuries to understand. In real life, this idea shows up in goals. You try to finish a task, but there's always one more thing to fix, one more step. The finish line keeps moving. In relationships, healing from pain feels like crossing endless small distances. You feel close. Then it shifts. Again and again. The paradox of Achilles and the tortoise reminds us that sometimes logic and experience do not agree. Our minds can create a world that feels frozen, but reality moves anyway. The world does not wait for perfect understanding. It runs forward even when the path looks infinite. Service Recovery Paradox. Picture this. A woman walks into a hotel. Her room is not ready. She is upset. But the manager acts fast. He upgrades her, sends flowers, offers dinner. The woman leaves happier than if nothing went wrong. That is the Service Recovery Paradox. It says that a customer who experiences a problem and sees it resolved well can become more loyal than one who never faced a problem at all. It goes against what we expect. We think mistakes lead to distrust, but when handled with care, a mistake can build more trust. This idea is backed by research. In business studies, customers who go through a well-handled failure often rate the company higher than those who had no issue because they felt seen. They felt valued. The emotion comes not from perfection, but from repair. In families, this happens when someone forgets a birthday, but then apologizes in a real way. The relationship becomes stronger. In friendships, a fight followed by true healing often creates more depth. The paradox shows that resolution carries more weight than prevention, but this only works when the recovery is honest and strong. If the repair is weak, it backfires. If the apology is fake, the damage deepens. The paradox is fragile. It works only when the repair touches the heart. Companies use this in strategy. They train staff to respond fast, to turn anger into loyalty, to make people feel like more than a number. The paradox teaches that a break in trust is not the end. It is a chance. A moment to show care louder than words ever could. Service Recovery Paradox reveals something quiet and powerful, that the deepest bonds often begin not in perfection, but in the strength of response when things fall apart. The Boltzmann Brain Paradox. What if everything you remember is a lie? What if you are just a single brain floating in space, imagining your whole life, your family, your world, your past? This is the terrifying idea behind the Boltzmann brain paradox. It comes from physics and questions the way we understand reality. According to the laws of thermodynamics, the universe is supposed to move toward disorder over time. But if the universe is truly infinite and eternal, then strange things can randomly happen due to chance. One of those things could be a brain forming by pure luck, not inside a body, not on a planet, just a brain alone in space. If this brain somehow forms with memories and senses, it would think it is alive and living a normal life. But in truth, it would be alone and surrounded by nothing. This idea came from a scientist named Ludwig Boltzmann, who tried to explain how order could appear in a chaotic universe. He believed that our universe might be a rare, ordered moment in a sea of randomness. But later thinkers pointed out that if rare things can happen, it is actually more likely that a single brain would form than a whole universe, because one brain takes fewer steps than forming galaxies and planets. That is where the paradox begins. If it is more likely for a brain to appear than a universe, then maybe we are not in a real universe at all. Maybe each of us is a Boltzmann brain imagining everything. This sounds impossible, but it is a serious question in cosmology and quantum physics. It touches on the problem of observation and how much we can really trust what we see and feel. In daily life, the Boltzmann brain paradox reflects deeper doubts. It reminds us how fragile our connection to reality really is. People can be sure of their memories and their senses, but those things can fail. Dreams feel real while they last. Hallucinations can be detailed and convincing. Even history can be rewritten or forgotten. In science, this paradox is part of the debate about entropy and time. It asks if what we see around us is typical or rare. The Boltzmann brain paradox does not mean you are not real, but it shows how hard it is to prove that you are. It teaches that truth is more than memory and feeling. It might depend on things too big to fully understand. Grain of Millet Paradox. Will a single soundless grain falling make any noise? If it falls alone, we hear nothing. But if many silent grains fall together, we start to hear something. How can silence become sound just by adding more silence? This is the grain of Millet Paradox. It comes from ancient Greek philosophy and asks where change really begins. It was first raised by Zeno of Elea, who created many paradoxes to challenge how we think about motion, time, and perception. In this one, he showed how a single grain falling seems to make no noise, but a full sack of grain clearly does. So at what point does silence turn into sound? Is it the 10th grain, the 100th, or the 1000th? The paradox reveals the problem of vague boundaries. We assume we can clearly tell when something changes, but often we cannot. This is called a Sorites Paradox. It also applies to things like baldness. If you remove one hair, a person is not bald. But if you keep removing one hair at a time, at what moment do they become bald? It is hard to say. In science, this relates to thresholds. In chemistry, a few atoms might do nothing. But when you reach a certain number, they create a reaction. In psychology, small moments of stress may go unnoticed, but over time, they can build into burnout. In relationships, one lie may seem harmless, but many small lies turn into distrust. In workplaces, a little overwork may feel normal, but small increases over months can lead to exhaustion. Imagine someone saying they are fine every day, just one quiet response each time. But those silent signals grow. One day, the silence becomes the loudest thing in the room. The grain of Millet Paradox reminds us that big problems can grow from small ignored signs. It shows that gradual change is hard to notice until it is too late. History has also seen this pattern. A few unfair laws slowly grew into injustice. A few broken rules led to revolutions. The lesson is simple but powerful. Not all change is sudden. Some of it arrives so slowly that we fail to notice, until it becomes too loud to ignore. Paradox of Thrift. Saving money is a good habit. But what if everyone saved money at the same time? What if nobody spent? The paradox of thrift shows that when every person tries to save more during hard times, the whole economy can suffer. This idea was explained by the economist John Maynard Keynes. He showed that spending and saving are not only personal actions, they also affect the whole system. When one person saves, it feels smart. But when millions do it together, businesses lose income. That leads to job cuts. That leads to less spending. And the cycle goes on. The economy slows down because the money stops moving. Imagine this. A bakery in your town sells less bread because people are saving money. The owner earns less and fires one employee. That employee now has no income and stops buying lunch from the nearby shop. The shop earns less and cuts back too. One decision to save spreads quietly and deeply. In families, this paradox appears when fear controls action. Parents save every rupee during uncertain times. But this reduces their purchases from small sellers who then struggle to earn. In workplaces, companies freeze hiring or cut costs when sales drop. But this leads to fewer jobs and even lower sales in the long run. In history, this paradox became clear during the Great Depression. People lost confidence and stopped spending. This made the crisis worse. Governments learned that during deep recessions, public spending must increase to keep the economy alive. In science, systems need energy to function. Just like an engine needs fuel, an economy needs flow. Money must move between hands. If everyone holds on to it, the machine stops. The paradox of thrift teaches that individual logic can clash with group logic. It reminds us that sometimes acting safe alone can create danger for all. It is not a lesson against saving. It is a lesson about balance, about knowing when saving helps and when spending keeps others alive. Quantum suicide. A scientist sits in a lab and prepares a strange experiment. He believes in many worlds theory, that every quantum event splits reality into different branches. So he sets up a quantum device connected to a gun that will go off if the particle spins one way, but not if it spins the other. He flips the switch. In one world, he dies. In another, he lives. The theory says he will always find himself in the world where he survives. This is the quantum suicide thought experiment. It is not meant to be done in real life. It is a way to explain how strange and deep quantum theory really is. According to the many worlds theory, every time a quantum decision is made, reality splits. One version goes one way, one version goes another. Unlike the classical world where something happens or it does not, the quantum world allows both to happen in different branches. The quantum suicide paradox asks what happens to the person who tests this. From their point of view, they only ever live. They never experience death. But in the larger multiverse, there are many versions of them, some alive, some not. The experiment is based on the idea of quantum immortality, but most scientists do not accept this as physical truth. It is a mental tool to think about what quantum mechanics allows. In science, this paradox shows how observation affects reality. In the famous double-slit experiment, particles behave differently when watched. In relationships, people sometimes live as if bad outcomes only happen to others. They take risks, thinking their own story will always be safe. In history, leaders made dangerous choices believing they would never face the worst result. The quantum suicide paradox is not about science fiction. It is about belief and risk. It reminds us that reality is not always what it seems, and that what we know may be only one part of what is true. Sword and Shield Paradox. Imagine a man in a marketplace selling two things: a sword that can cut through anything, and a shield that can block anything. Someone asks, "What happens if you hit your shield with your sword?" This is the heart of the sword and shield paradox. It is a contradiction that appears when two claims cancel each other out. If the sword truly cuts anything, no shield should be able to stop it. But if the shield can stop anything, the sword should fail. Both cannot be right at the same time. The logic collapses under its own weight. This paradox comes from ancient China, from a story told to show the limits of language and advertising. It is not just about weapons. It is about how contradictions can live inside bold promises. You might hear someone say they are always honest and never speak when it is not needed. But when silence becomes dishonesty, the same contradiction appears. Visualize a modern version. A software company promises complete security and complete freedom at the same time. But complete freedom usually weakens security. Complete security limits freedom. Both cannot grow together. One must give way. This paradox happens when words are pushed too far without balance. In families, a parent may say they are always open but never tolerate mistakes. A child is confused. How can they speak freely if failure is not allowed? The shield is in the way of the sword. In politics, leaders may claim total control and total democracy, but one erases the other. The sword and shield paradox teaches that some claims break when you put them side by side. It warns us to listen carefully when people promise everything. If one part blocks the other, then the whole thing falls. It is not just about logic. It is about honesty. When a promise sounds perfect, look closely. It might be fighting with itself. Grand Hotel Paradox. Picture a hotel with an infinite number of rooms. Every single room is already full, yet somehow the hotel manager says they can still take more guests, not just one, but infinite more. This is the Grand Hotel Paradox, a strange idea in mathematics created by David Hilbert. It shows how infinity does not behave like normal numbers. If you move each guest from their current room to the next room number, room 1 to room 2, room 2 to room 3, and so on, then room 1 becomes free, that open space, even though it was full a moment ago. Now, if infinite new guests arrive, the manager can move every guest to the room that is twice their current number. Room 1 goes to room 2, room 2 goes to room 4. That way, all the odd-numbered rooms are now free, and that is an infinite number of rooms again. The hotel is always full, and always able to take more. This paradox is not just for fun. It shows how infinity challenges normal thinking. In real life, we use infinity in science and space. The universe may be infinite. Numbers and math go on forever, but our minds are used to limits. That is why the hotel feels so strange. Imagine a school that has infinite students and wants to hold a meeting. Every student gets a chair. The school adds more students, and somehow, without moving anyone out, more chairs appear. That is what this paradox does. It opens more space in something already full. This idea teaches that infinity is not a number. It is a process, a direction that never ends. It also teaches us about scale. Sometimes things can grow without leaving anything behind, and sometimes things that seem full still hold more. In business, this happens when a company already has many customers, but still keeps growing. In the mind, we think we are full of thoughts, but new ideas still come. The Grand Hotel Paradox shows that with the right shift, there is always room, even when logic says it is full. The key is not the size, it is the movement. The Teletransportation Paradox. Picture this. You step into a machine. It scans every atom in your body and sends that data to another place. In seconds, a copy of you appears on the other side, but the original you is destroyed. Are you still alive? This is the Teletransportation Paradox, a problem in identity. It asks, what makes you you? If every part of your body is copied perfectly, is that person really you? Or is it a new person who just thinks they are you? This idea is often linked to science fiction, but also shows up in real science discussions. In theory, a machine could one day recreate a human body atom by atom. But does copying every cell mean copying the soul, the experience, the self? The paradox comes when the machine destroys the original. It feels like death and rebirth at once. But who is reborn? Visualize a man using this machine daily to travel for work. On the 10th day, the system fails to destroy the original. Now 2 people claim to be him. They remember the same childhood. They love the same wife. They fear the same things. But only one was supposed to exist. Which one is real? In real life, we face this in smaller ways. Memory loss, brain damage, aging. At what point are we no longer who we were? If your personality changes slowly, are you still the same person? This also connects to ideas in digital identity. If a copy of your mind lived online, is that you? The Teletransportation Paradox shows how fragile identity is. We trust our name, our face, our past. But if all those could be copied, what would be left that is truly yours? The idea is not about science fiction. It is about what it means to be one person and not another. Stockdale Paradox. Imagine a soldier in prison, beaten, starved, and forgotten. He refuses to lie to himself. He knows it is bad, but he also believes deeply that he will get out one day. And he does. This is the Stockdale Paradox, named after Admiral James Stockdale, a prisoner of war in Vietnam. He said the people who broke were not the ones who feared. It was the ones who believed it would be over soon. When it was not, their hope died. But he survived because he faced the truth. He accepted the harsh facts and still never lost faith. This paradox is a balance. It teaches that blind optimism is dangerous, but pure realism without hope is deadly. The strongest people live in the middle. They see clearly, but they also believe. They hold both truths together without letting one destroy the other. Picture a woman going through a long illness. She tells herself the truth. This is going to be hard. She cries, she shakes, but she never says it will last forever. She believes she will heal, and she fights. In business, leaders use this paradox during crises. They say we are in trouble, but we will survive. In families, someone may admit this year is hard, but say clearly, we will grow again. The paradox is about holding pain and hope in the same hands. Stockdale said you must never confuse faith that you will prevail with the discipline to confront the facts. If you only believe, you break. If you only look at the pain, you give up. But if you do both, you survive. The Stockdale Paradox is not about winning. It is about not letting go. It teaches that facing reality is not the end of hope. It is the beginning of real strength. The paradox of free will. Free will feels like the center of human life. It is the idea that you can choose your actions. You decide what to eat, who to love, when to speak, where to go. But the paradox of free will challenges this idea in a deep and serious way. It questions how true freedom can exist if the universe follows fixed laws or if your choices are shaped by things outside your control. If everything has a cause, then every action you take was caused by something else. Your environment, your past, your brain chemistry, even the way you were raised. That means your choices are not fully free, but if actions are not caused by anything at all, then they are random. And randomness is not freedom either. This is the paradox. If your decisions are determined, they are not free. If they are random, they are not really yours. So where does free will fit in between? Imagine this. You are walking through a grocery store. You pick the red apple instead of the green one. It feels like a choice. But was it? Maybe you had red apples as a child and you are unconsciously repeating a memory. Maybe you read somewhere that red apples are healthier. Maybe you just reached for what was closer. Your brain made a decision before you even noticed, and yet you feel like you chose. This tiny moment hides a massive debate. In science, studies using brain scans have shown that your brain starts preparing for a decision before you become aware of making it. A part of your brain activates before you say yes or no. This suggests that what you call choice might already be in motion. In philosophy, Thinkers have long debated this. Some say free will is just an illusion. Others argue it can exist even in a world with rules. In relationships, people struggle with free will when it comes to forgiveness. Can you blame someone for a mistake if they were shaped by pain or fear? In families, parents guide children for years, shaping how they think. But still, children grow up and feel like their choices are their own. In workplaces, people feel proud when they succeed and guilty when they fail. But those outcomes depend on luck, timing, and countless hidden factors. Throughout history, religious and legal systems have tried to hold people responsible for their actions. This only works if people are free to choose right from wrong. But if every action has a cause behind it, where do we draw the line? Some modern thinkers believe that free will exists in how we respond to our thoughts. Even if the first thought is automatic, we can still reflect. We can pause. We can override impulse. That small space between thought and action is where some believe free will lives. The paradox of free will does not have a final answer, but it opens your eyes to how complex choice really is. It shows that freedom might not be about total control. It might be about awareness. The ability to notice your influences, to choose with understanding, not just react. This paradox teaches that human experience is more than logic. It is a mix of history, biology, and emotion. And in that space, something like free will can still breathe. The Raven Paradox. The Raven Paradox starts with a simple sentence. All ravens are black. That seems straightforward, but it becomes strange when you think about how to prove it. If you see a black raven, it supports the statement. That makes sense. But logic says that seeing something that is not a raven and is not black also supports the statement. Like seeing a white shoe or a red car. That sounds wrong, but here is how it works. The sentence, "all ravens are black," means there is no such thing as a non-black raven. So any non-raven that is not black also helps confirm by not breaking the rule. This is where the paradox begins. Why should a green apple have anything to do with ravens? Imagine this. A scientist is trying to prove that all ravens are black. He observes 10 black ravens. Then he sees a white sneaker. Logic says the sneaker adds evidence because it is a non-raven and not black. But in real life, that feels meaningless. This shows the gap between formal logic and practical reasoning. In philosophy, this paradox was introduced by Carl Hempel in the 1940s to show the strange effects of how we confirm general statements. It highlights a problem in what is called inductive reasoning. That is when you make a rule from many examples. The paradox teaches that not all examples are equal, even if logic says they are. In science, this matters a lot. Scientists test ideas by gathering evidence. But if you accept every observation that fits the rule, you might end up with too much meaningless data. You need relevance, not just logical fit. In relationships, this paradox shows up when people try to confirm beliefs by looking for support everywhere. If someone believes a person is kind, they may see every polite action as proof. But they also ignore actions that do not fit. In families, parents may decide that their child is shy. Then they treat quiet behavior as confirmation but overlook when the child speaks up. In workplaces, managers may form opinions about employees and then filter all behavior to fit that view. This is called confirmation bias, and the Raven Paradox is connected to it. In history, this paradox reflects how people build stories about the world. A few matching examples can feel like proof, but the real picture needs more careful thinking. The Raven Paradox teaches that truth is not just about collecting facts. It is about knowing which facts truly matter. It reminds us that logic can be correct but still feel wrong, and that real understanding often means asking better questions, not just counting more answers. Dichotomy Paradox. Motion is supposed to be simple. You walk from one place to another. You run across a street. A car moves forward and arrives at a destination. But when you examine movement with logic, something strange happens. The Dichotomy Paradox says that before you can reach your destination, you must first get halfway there. Then you must get halfway of what remains, and then halfway again and again. The distance can be cut endlessly. The pieces become smaller, but they never disappear. This creates a puzzle. If you must complete infinite steps to go anywhere, how do you ever arrive? This idea was first described by the ancient Greek philosopher Zeno. He used it to show that our sense of reality might be hiding something deeper. The word dichotomy means division into two. Zeno imagined any distance being divided again and again. That means every action involves crossing infinite points. But completing infinite steps should be impossible. Yet in the real world, people walk, cars drive, arrows fly. So, the paradox is not that motion does not happen. It is that motion appears to break the rules of logic. Visualize this. A child stands at one end of a hallway. At the other end is a toy. To get there, the child must go halfway. Then halfway again. If you follow the rule, there is always another piece to cross. The child would never reach the toy. But of course, in reality, the child grabs the toy in seconds. The mind says it should be impossible, but the body shows it is not. The Dichotomy Paradox challenges how we understand space and time. In the past, philosophers believed that space could be divided endlessly. But in modern science, we now know that there may be limits. In quantum mechanics, space and time may not be continuous. They may be made of tiny units called Planck length and Planck time. Below that level, the idea of division stops making sense. This shows that Zeno's logic was not wrong. It simply reached beyond what we can measure. In everyday life, the paradox shows up emotionally. Think about a task you fear. You try to start, but the steps seem endless. First, you open your laptop. Then you organize your files. Then you research. Then you write. The effort becomes a chain of smaller and smaller pieces. You feel stuck before you even begin. That is the feeling of the Dichotomy Paradox. The infinite division of action. In therapy, this feeling is addressed by using something called micro-goals. Instead of trying to do everything, you aim to do the first smallest step. This method works because it breaks the mental illusion that infinity stands in your way. In movement science, athletes train by focusing on body position rather than thinking about reaching the finish line. The paradox is solved by not thinking too far. You do not need to finish the infinite steps. You just take one step. The next step will follow. The Dichotomy Paradox reminds us that logic can become a trap when it forgets how life moves. In the mind, there may be infinite reasons not to begin. But in reality, beginning is the only way to reach the end. Schrödinger's cat. In science, truth is supposed to be clear. Something exists, or it does not. A cat is alive, or dead. A light is on, or off. But in the world of quantum physics, even this breaks down. The Schrödinger's cat paradox was created to show how strange and confusing the microscopic world can be. It begins with a simple thought experiment. Imagine a sealed box. Inside is a cat, a tiny amount of radioactive material, a Geiger counter to detect radiation, and a mechanism that breaks a poison capsule if the radiation is detected. If the atom decays, the poison is released, and the cat dies. If not, the cat lives. But you cannot know what happened until you open the box. According to quantum physics, before you look inside, the atom exists in a superposition. That means it is both decayed and not decayed at the same time. The cat is therefore both alive and dead at once. Only when you open the box does the state become real. That moment of observation breaks the superposition and forces one result. The paradox here is not about killing a cat. It is about the role of the observer in deciding what is real. Visualize this. A girl stares at a covered painting. She knows the artist is either someone she loves or someone she fears. But until she lifts the cloth, Both feelings live inside her. Her fear and her hope are mixed. The truth exists in two forms. Only when she pulls back the cover does one take over. That is how Schrödinger's cat feels. In quantum mechanics, particles like electrons or photons exist in many states at once. They only settle into a clear state when they are measured. This has been proven through experiments like the double-slit experiment. It means the act of observing is not passive. It changes the outcome. This makes the universe feel less like a machine and more like a conversation. Your attention shapes what becomes real. In daily life, this paradox appears in relationships. You send a risky message and wait. Before you read the reply, all outcomes live in your mind. Rejection and acceptance, love and silence, they are both true until the message is opened. In business, a pitch sent to a client lives in both success and failure until it is seen. The waiting becomes the box. Schrödinger's cat reminds us that uncertainty is not just about the future. It is built into the fabric of reality. It tells us that the truth is not always waiting to be found. Sometimes, it waits to be chosen. Bootstrap Paradox. What happens when the past is built from the future? How can something exist without being created at all? Picture this. A young boy finds a strange book in his grandfather's attic. The book is full of scientific formulas, pages covered in notes far beyond anything he has learned. On the last page, he finds a name. His own. He grows up, studies those formulas, learns the science, becomes a physicist. One day he travels back in time using the same theories from that book. While hiding, he forgets the book in a place someone else will find it. Years later, a boy discovers it in an attic. The same book, the same notes. But who wrote the book? Where did the information come from? It was never written for the first time. It just kept moving through time in a loop that never began. This is the Bootstrap Paradox. It is a situation in time travel where an object, idea, or person exists without ever being created. It is not passed down. It is not discovered. It simply appears and becomes its own origin. The name comes from the old saying of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, which means doing something impossible. This paradox is a perfect example of that idea. Something creates itself with no starting point. Imagine a beautiful woman standing in a museum. She is staring at a painting. It is a portrait of a woman that looks exactly like her. Same face, same eyes, same mark on the cheek. The guide tells her it is over 300 years old, but her heart beats faster. She knows she has seen it before. She remembers painting it. But how could she paint something she had not seen first? It makes no sense. But the memory is clear. Later, when she grows older, she becomes a painter. And one night, she paints that exact face from a feeling she cannot explain. The portrait is passed down, placed in a museum. Years pass. She sees it again as a young girl. The loop is complete, but no one ever created the original image. It just stayed alive inside time. The Bootstrap Paradox is not just science fiction. In science, it is taken seriously as a logical problem within time travel theory. It challenges causality. That is, the relationship between cause and effect. Normally, something happens because something else caused it. You eat because you are hungry. You cry because you are hurt. But in the Bootstrap Paradox, there is no cause, only effect. The cause and the effect are each other. It becomes a closed circle. In physics, this is discussed in relation to closed time-like curves. These are paths in space-time that loop back on themselves. The idea is that something could return to the same point it began, like a snake swallowing its own tail. Theoretically, some solutions to Einstein's equations allow for such paths. Wormholes and rotating black holes are among the ideas scientists explore when talking about this. But the paradox remains. If a person or thing travels through such a loop, Where did it begin? In relationships, this paradox can feel like the emotional cycles people live in. Imagine a mother who always tells her daughter to be strong, because her own mother said the same. No one knows why the rule exists, but it keeps repeating, passed on without question. No one started it, but no one stops it either. In families, beliefs get passed like the book in the attic. Stories are told again and again until no one remembers where they came from, but they shape how people think, how they live, how they choose. In history, myths are born and reborn through storytelling. A hero becomes a legend becomes a story. The story inspires someone to act bravely. That action creates another hero, and the cycle continues. Sometimes people live out old tales without knowing they are the latest version of something ancient. In workplaces, an employee might follow a rule because it is the way things have always been done. No one knows who made the rule, but everyone follows it. The system runs without a beginning. Just habit, just tradition, just the loop. The Bootstrap Paradox becomes even more strange when applied to information. What if a person hears a song in their dream, writes it down, and shares it with the world? Years later, another person dreams of the same song because they heard it in their childhood. They grow up and sing it back to the world. The cycle keeps turning. No one ever writes the song. It exists by feeding itself. One of the most famous examples of the paradox in fiction is in the show Doctor Who. The Doctor receives a musical composition from someone in the future. He travels to the past and gives it to the composer, who then becomes famous for creating it. But the composer only had it because he was given it. So who truly made it? The answer is no one, or everyone, or time itself. The Bootstrap Paradox is unsettling because it breaks the idea of order. It plays with the line between creator and creation. It whispers that not everything has an origin, and if some things do not begin, maybe they cannot end. This is more than a science puzzle. It is a question about existence, about memory, about identity. Can you exist without a start? Can you remember something that never happened? It makes you wonder. How many of your thoughts are truly yours? How many stories you tell were told to you? How many rules you live by were never made, only carried? The Bootstrap Paradox asks you to sit with the discomfort of not knowing. Not every question leads to an answer. Some questions lead to more questions, but sometimes that is enough, because mystery is part of being human. And in the silence of that loop, something strange begins to feel familiar, like a thought you never had, but always knew. Paradox of enrichment. Helping too much can become the reason something breaks. Adding more of what seems good can destroy the very thing you are trying to protect. This is the painful logic behind the paradox of enrichment. It begins with a simple idea. If you give more food to animals, they should thrive. If you give more resources to a system, it should grow stronger. But in certain cases, especially in nature, the opposite happens. The system collapses because of the extra help. This paradox shows how increasing resources for a species can make its ecosystem more unstable and lead to extinction. The paradox was first introduced by the Dutch ecologist Michael Rosenzweig in the 1970s. He was studying predator and prey models, especially the Lotka-Volterra equations, which are used to predict how populations of predators and their prey change over time. These equations show how the number of rabbits might rise and fall depending on the number of foxes, and how the number of foxes depends on how many rabbits are available to eat. Rosenzweig found something strange. When the environment was enriched by adding more food for the prey population would grow, as expected. But the larger prey population allowed predator numbers to grow rapidly too. Then the predator population became so high that it started to hunt the prey faster than the prey could reproduce. The prey crashed, and with it, the predators crashed too. Both populations ended up worse than before. This goes against common sense. Most people believe more food means more life, But in dynamic systems, more of something does not always lead to stability. It can lead to wild swings and crashes. The system becomes more fragile, not more secure. In simple terms, when prey animals like deer or fish have access to too much food, they reproduce quickly. Predators then flourish. But that large number of predators makes the system unstable. The balance is lost. Over time, the richness turns into a trap. In real life, this happens outside nature too. In human economics, a country may give excessive subsidies to a particular industry to help it grow. At first, it works. But when the help becomes too much, it removes the natural competition and pressure to improve. The system becomes inefficient and bloated. Eventually, it crashes under its own weight. This is a human version of the paradox. In parenting, some children are given everything: more comfort, more choices, more control. The goal is to help them thrive, but the result can be the opposite. They grow without developing the skills to face hardship. Then one day, when challenge finally comes, they are not prepared. The abundance becomes the reason for their collapse. This emotional effect mirrors the ecological model. In agriculture, over-fertilizing land is an example of this paradox. Too much fertilizer leads to nutrient-rich soil, which causes rapid plant growth. But that growth weakens the roots, attracts more pests, and creates an unstable system. Eventually, the soil becomes depleted and the crops fail. Farmers around the world have faced this trap. They added more and more, expecting more returns. But instead, they got destruction. In education, if students are given all the answers instead of being taught how to think, their learning becomes shallow. The system becomes about memorizing, not understanding. The pressure to enrich creates the illusion of success while slowly removing resilience and depth. The paradox of enrichment shows that balance is more powerful than abundance. It teaches that too much of a good thing can break the very system it is meant to support. The emotional weight of this idea comes from its simplicity. People want to help. They want to offer more. But sometimes, helping without limits causes harm. In ecosystems, this can mean death. In families, it can mean emotional weakness. In economies, it can mean financial collapse. In friendships, it can mean emotional exhaustion. The intention is pure, but the result is toxic. Many ecological systems operate on a fragile thread. Natural predators and prey evolve over time to keep each other in check. When humans interfere by enriching the environment for one side, they disrupt a system that has been shaped for thousands of years. The paradox is not about guilt, it is about awareness. Even kindness needs wisdom. In cities, when governments try to enrich a specific area too fast without preparing for the growth, the system breaks. Traffic increases, housing prices explode, local businesses collapse under the pressure. Instead of progress, chaos spreads. This is the paradox repeating itself in urban development. In therapy, the concept appears when a person is always rescued from consequences. The brain never learns to adapt. The nervous system does not strengthen. Growth becomes fear. Comfort becomes limitation. Just like the prey that flourished too fast and attracted too many predators, the person who never faced struggle may one day fall too hard. The paradox of enrichment is deeply uncomfortable because it tells us that good intentions can lead to collapse. It warns us not to assume that more is always better. It invites us to look carefully at balance, in science, in emotion, in growth. The secret is not in how much you give. It is in how wisely you give it. This concept is now used in managing fisheries, protecting wildlife, designing social systems, and even in software design. Overloading a program with too many features makes it harder to maintain. What began as support turns into clutter. The system crashes under the weight of its own improvements. Sometimes strength comes not from adding more, but from knowing when to stop. The paradox of enrichment is not just about ecosystems. It is a mirror for how we live. In trying to protect what we love, we may accidentally create the threat. And only by understanding this can we stop the cycle. Card Paradox. It seems simple at first, a card with a sentence written on each side. But the moment you try to understand it, logic collapses into itself. Your trust in truth starts to slip. This is not a magic trick or a puzzle that needs a clever answer. It is a trap made of words. The card paradox is not about what you see. It is about what you believe, and how fast that belief can break. The card paradox works like this. There is a card with two statements, one on the front and one on the back. The first side says, "The statement on the other side of this card is true." You turn the card over. The second side says, "The statement on the other side of this card is false." You go back and forth, reading each side, waiting for one to make sense, but they never do. If the first side is true, then the second side must be true too. But the second side says the first side is false, so they both cannot be true. If the first side is false, then the second side must be false too. But if the second side is false, then the first side is true. You are stuck in a loop. Each sentence depends on the other. Each sentence destroys the other. There is no exit, no starting point, no stable answer. This paradox is a version of what is called a self-referential paradox. It happens when something refers back to itself in a way that creates contradiction. The most famous example is the liar paradox. A sentence that says, "This statement is false. If it is true, then it is false. If it is false, then it is true." The card paradox takes that same confusion and stretches it across two surfaces. It forces your brain to bounce between ideas until it gives up. In logic and philosophy, this is not just a game. It is a serious problem. Self-reference is a major issue in the foundations of mathematics and language. When a system can refer to itself, it creates risk. That risk is contradiction. In the early 20th century, the mathematician Kurt Gödel used a similar idea to prove something shocking. He showed that any system of logic strong enough to explain itself will always contain statements that are true but cannot be proven within that system. That means no matter how perfect your logic seems, there will always be a hole, a hidden flaw, a truth you can never fully reach. In science, the card paradox represents a deeper issue. When observation depends on what is being observed, you start to lose objectivity. In quantum mechanics, particles behave differently when they are measured. The act of watching changes what is seen. In physics, this is called the observer effect, and it connects to this idea of self-reference. You cannot step outside the system to measure the system without affecting it. In relationships, the card paradox appears when communication loops into itself. Imagine two people where each one defines their truth based on the other's truth. One says, "I am fine if you are fine." The other says, "I am fine if you are fine." No one ever says how they really feel. They just reflect each other. If one breaks, the other breaks too. But if no one breaks, nothing moves. The result is silence, but not peace, just stillness that hides confusion. In families, parents sometimes teach children values based on old family rules. Those rules were passed down without explanation. When a child asks why something is wrong, the answer is, "Because it is." Or worse, "Because we said so." The system refers back to itself. There is no deeper logic, no core, just repetition. In workplaces, this paradox can live in company policies. Rules are followed because the handbook says they must be. But when you ask why the rule exists, the answer leads to another rule. You dig deeper and find that no one knows where it started, yet everyone follows it. The loop of logic supports itself with no base. The card paradox also touches on the limits of artificial intelligence. A machine designed to test its own logic might fall into endless checking. If it tries to prove that its answer is correct by referring back to its own programming, it might never stop. That is why some programs must be built with limits. They cannot be allowed to ask infinite questions about their own function. This paradox teaches something important. It shows that truth is not always clear, that the structure of a sentence or a belief can hide traps. Not because the idea is wrong, but because the form is broken. When meaning is built on itself with no anchor, it collapses under its own weight. But it also shows something more human. The card paradox reminds us of what it feels like to be stuck in a loop of doubt. When every answer makes you more confused, when each explanation raises a new problem. It feels like trying to hold two opposite thoughts at once, like loving someone who hurt you, like wanting to speak but fearing the words, like trusting your instincts but questioning them at the same time. It does not have an answer, and that is what makes it powerful. The card paradox is not about solving, it is about seeing how fragile logic can be, seeing how quickly certainty turns into confusion, and seeing how even something as small as a card can open a hole in the way we understand everything. So next time you think something makes sense just because it fits together, remember the card. Remember that the loop can feel smooth, but that does not mean it leads anywhere. Some puzzles are not made to be solved. They are made to remind us that some doors are mirrors, and some mirrors do not show what is real. Ship of Theseus. Identity feels permanent. You believe you are the same person you were 5 years ago. You think a city, a family, or a belief stays whole through time. But what if every part changes? Piece by piece, cell by cell, brick by brick. What happens when nothing original remains, but the name stays the same? This is where the illusion begins to break. This is the question that shatters the surface of everything that seems whole. The Ship of Theseus is an ancient thought experiment. It asks if an object that has had all of its components replaced still remains the same object. The story starts with a ship. The people of Athens preserved the ship of their hero Theseus as a symbol of pride. Over time, some wooden planks began to rot, so the planks were replaced. Then other parts wore out. They were also replaced. This continued for many years. Eventually, every single part of the ship had been replaced. There was no original piece left. But the ship was still called the Ship of Theseus. The question is simple and disturbing. Is it still the same ship? This problem challenges how we understand identity and continuity. If the physical pieces are not the same, what keeps something real? Is it the shape, the memory, the name, or something deeper? In science, this shows up in biology. Human cells die and are replaced regularly. Your skin regenerates, your bones rebuild. Even brain cells change over time. The person you were as a child no longer exists in the same biological sense, yet you still feel like you are you. What is the thing that stays? In relationships, this paradox becomes emotional. Two people fall in love. Years go by. They both change. New jobs, new thoughts, new fears. They no longer like the same things. The jokes feel different. One person wonders, is this still the same relationship? The feelings used to be easy. Now they are confusing. But the name stays. Marriage, love, partnership. Is it still the same connection if every part is changed? In history, this problem appears in culture and tradition. A country declares it stands for certain values. Over generations, the laws change. The people change. The language changes. But the country keeps the same flag, the same anthem. Is it still the same nation? What gives something its true identity? Some philosophers say the identity of the ship remains because the changes are gradual. There was no single moment when the ship stopped being itself. Others argue that the ship is not the same at all. It only looks like the original. A deeper version of the paradox takes it even further. What if someone kept all the old planks that were removed and rebuilt the original ship elsewhere? Now there are two ships, one made of original materials, one with the same design but newer parts. Which is the real Ship of Theseus? This question has no easy answer. It pulls apart how we define objects, people, and time. In psychology, the ship of Theseus appears in identity theory. A person who goes through trauma or transformation may lose pieces of who they were. They form new habits, new thoughts, new boundaries. Are they still the same person? Is healing just the act of becoming someone else? In artificial intelligence and robotics, this paradox is used when designing machines that upgrade over time. If a robot has its parts replaced one by one, does it still contain its original identity? In digital life, you may change your username, your profile picture, your contacts, but the account still carries your name. Is it still you? The ship of Theseus shows us that identity is not stored in parts. It lives in how we choose to see continuity. It is a trick of memory, a choice made by our minds to ignore the constant change. Because accepting that everything shifts makes life feel fragile. So we hold on to the story of the ship, even when the sea changes it, even when time replaces every nail. In law, this becomes real. A company may replace every employee, change every policy, but still claim the same brand. A building may be destroyed and rebuilt, but the address stays. Ownership continues. Identity remains. In religion, sacred objects are passed down, repaired, cleaned, even copied, but their meaning grows stronger, not weaker. The paradox shows that what we keep may not be material. It may be the belief itself. Some modern interpretations say that the ship of Theseus teaches us about narrative, that the ship is not in the wood, it is in the story people tell about it. It is in the meaning they give to it. If people still believe it is the same, then maybe that belief itself holds the identity together. This turns the paradox into a mirror. It reflects how we create meaning in our lives. We are constantly rebuilding. Bodies age, friendships evolve, cities fall and rise. Yet we act as if the core remains untouched. The ship of Theseus does not break reality, it reveals it. That everything we think is stable is actually moving, and we are the ones choosing what to call the same. The Hypergame Paradox. Picture this. A young boy enters a castle built from mirrors. At the center is a glowing screen. The screen shows a list of games. Some are simple. Others are complicated. At the bottom, there is one final option. It says, "Play the game where you choose any game." He smiles and presses it. The mirrors shift, and the game begins. But he does not know which one. This is how it starts. The trap is invisible, because it looks like freedom. The more choices you have, the more control you think you hold. But that is the first layer of the trick. The Hypergame Paradox is about choices that collapse on themselves. It starts with the idea of a game. A game has rules. Two people can play. They take turns. One wins, one loses. Now imagine a list of all games. You are allowed to pick any game. That list itself becomes a game. You are now playing a game about choosing a game. And suddenly, you are no longer inside the game. You are standing above it, but somehow still trapped inside. This idea was first introduced by the mathematician William Zwicker. He described the hypergame as a game where a player can choose any finite game to play. That sounds fine until you realize the act of choosing creates another game. So if someone chooses hypergame itself as the game, the structure turns in on itself. You are now inside the game of choosing a game which includes the game you just chose. It loops endlessly. And because it never finishes, it becomes infinite. But hypergame is defined as a game that must end. That contradiction creates the paradox. This may sound like abstract logic, but it shows up in real life all the time. In business, someone may say they want to create a system that allows for all strategies. But what happens when a person chooses to play the strategy of building the system itself? That action becomes part of the game and also changes the rules of the game. In relationships, a person might say, "You can be anything you want with me." But when the other person chooses to become someone unpredictable or uncontainable, the freedom itself becomes a threat. The The promise that you can choose any version of yourself breaks the safety of the connection. The game of love begins to eat its own rules. In politics, this paradox appears in open debates. When a society claims that any opinion is allowed, eventually someone uses that freedom to suggest that freedom should end. The moment you include the option to break the game is no longer safe. That is how democracies collapse. They allow their own destruction through the very openness they protect. In families, this paradox shows up in parenting. A parent may say, "You can choose what you want for dinner," but the child chooses not just a meal, but to question dinner itself. Why do we have to eat together? Now the rule of choice has been used to challenge the system that gave the choice. The child is not being rebellious, they are just seeing the game behind the game. This feels innocent, but it stirs fear in the adult, because the frame is cracking. Hypergame Paradox reveals that when systems allow too much choice without boundaries, they risk collapse. It teaches that the power to choose is only meaningful when the structure of choosing is stable. If you allow a person to question the rules of choosing itself, then the whole game can become infinite. The rules disappear. The players become lost. In artificial intelligence and recursive algorithms, this paradox is even more dangerous. If an AI is told to create the best strategy in a system, and it chooses to redesign the system itself, it can enter an infinite loop. The system keeps trying to improve the rules by building new rules, but never stops to play. It fails not from weakness, but from too much recursive thinking. Now, picture this again. A teenage girl is handed a tablet. The screen asks her to build a life. She can choose her interests, her clothes, her future job. But then the app asks, "Would you like to build a new version of this app?" She taps yes. Now she is building the tool that builds herself. The game never ends. She forgets what she liked. She forgets what she wanted, because she is busy trying to design the next version of the game that will ask the same question again. Hypergame Paradox is not about logic. It is about identity. It is about the feeling of being given total control and slowly realizing that too many options can become a prison. You start to doubt which choice was yours. You try to exit, but every exit is another level of the game. Every layer leads to another layer. There is no ground floor, only mirrors. In technology, this is why some platforms collapse. They try to offer everything. Every type of content, every style, every function. But when users are given too many tools with no clear purpose, they lose connection. The product becomes shapeless. The community becomes confused. The energy is lost because the system allowed itself to become too recursive. The game kept designing more games, but no one remembered how to play. In philosophy, this problem appears in discussions about free will. If every decision is a choice among all possible choices, then who decides which choices matter? If you say you chose based on your thoughts, then where did those thoughts come from? The self chooses the self, which chooses the self. The loop grows tighter. The Hypergame Paradox is a soft trap. It does not scream. It offers you the power to choose. But once you choose the power to keep choosing, you fall into it. Like a door that opens into another door that opens into another. Each one says freedom, but leads further away from stillness. The trap is not the game. The trap is the ability to turn the game into itself. The Preface Paradox. Truth is something we all want. People believe in facts. People trust what they read when it sounds certain. But the Preface Paradox shows something strange. It shows that even when every single part of a story feels true, the whole thing might not be. The problem starts quietly, inside something we rarely question. A book. A simple book with a title, a cover, and a long list of claims that all seem carefully researched and confidently written. But in the beginning, there is a short preface. And in that preface, the author often says something like this: "I believe everything in this book is true, but there may be a few mistakes." This is where the paradox begins. The author believes each statement in the book is true, but also believes that the book may contain errors. That means the author holds two opposite beliefs at once. Every chapter is trusted, but the total book is doubted. This is not about lying. This is about something deeper, a quiet admission that even when you do your best, some things might still be wrong. The Preface Paradox shows how belief and doubt can exist together, not as enemies, but side by side in the same mind. The paradox was introduced by philosopher David Makinson in the 1960s. He used it to explain a real-world problem about how humans think. We often trust each of our beliefs on their own, but when we step back and look at all our beliefs together, we start to think that not all of them can be right. The world is too complex, errors are too easy to make, our knowledge is limited. So we begin to doubt the whole, even while trusting every part, and somehow, that does not feel wrong. It feels normal. Imagine this. A doctor writes a medical guide. She spends years researching. Every fact is checked. Every drug and disease is carefully described. She publishes it with full confidence. But in the preface, she adds a line. She says even with all her care, there might be a few mistakes. Maybe some new research will change things. Maybe she misunderstood a rare condition. She still stands by every sentence. But she also knows the book is part of a bigger world, a world full of error and change. She is not lying. She is being honest about the limits of her knowledge. This paradox appears everywhere in life. In science, researchers publish papers with detailed results. They believe the methods are correct. They double-check their numbers, but at the end, they write a section on limitations. They admit there might be hidden variables. Future research might find better explanations. They are not being weak. They are showing intellectual humility. That kind of thinking helps science grow. In relationships, people often say they trust their partner fully. They believe what they are told. They believe in loyalty. But at the same time, many people still feel a little fear. They know mistakes happen. People lie. Even those we love can hide things. That quiet fear does not erase the love. It just lives beside it. The Preface Paradox is in that feeling. You believe fully, but you also make space for being wrong. In families, parents teach their children about life. They say, do not lie, always be kind, work hard. But as the child grows older, they realize the parent sometimes breaks these same rules. Maybe the parent lied once, maybe they failed. The child feels confused. But the truth is, the parent believed in the lessons, even if they could not always live them. This paradox happens inside families all the time. The lesson is trusted, but the human behind it is still flawed. In history, leaders and thinkers often publish their beliefs. They say what they stand for. They make speeches, but later they change. Or new facts show that something they said was wrong. That does not mean they lied. It means they were honest within their limits. They believed what they said at the time. But the full truth was bigger than what they knew. The Preface Paradox allows for that space. It shows that certainty and humility can exist together. In workplaces, employees write reports. Every number is checked. Every claim is supported. But at the bottom of the report, there is always a disclaimer. A sentence that says, results may vary, or errors may exist. It is not a mistake. It is a protection, a reminder that even the best work might miss something. The Preface Paradox helps us accept that no system is perfect, even the ones we build with care. This paradox is not a problem to fix. It is a truth to understand. It teaches that our minds are not broken for holding doubt with belief. It is natural. It is human. We believe each part because we trust our thinking. But we doubt the whole because we know our thinking is limited. That is not weakness. That is the beginning of wisdom. The Preface Paradox also teaches something about the way we live. We move through life making decisions. We trust our choices. But sometimes, we pause. We wonder if we are wrong. We question what we know. That small pause is what keeps us growing. Without it, we become blind to our errors. With it, we keep learning. Some people fear doubt. They think it makes their beliefs weaker. But the Preface Paradox shows the opposite. The ability to believe while also leaving room for error makes belief stronger. It means your faith in something is not empty. It is honest. It has been tested. So next time you read a book or hear a speech or listen to your own thoughts, remember this paradox. It is okay to trust your knowledge and still say you might be wrong. That is not contradiction. That is depth. That is maturity. That is truth with awareness. The Preface Paradox is not just a trick of logic. It is a lesson in how to be human, to live with strong beliefs and gentle doubt, to speak with confidence and still listen with care, to write your story and still add a preface that says, I believe this is true, but I know I could be wrong. And that is the beginning of something deeper than certainty. That is the beginning of real understanding. The paradox of the court. What happens when justice and logic collide so hard that neither survives? What would you do if the law gave you no way to win, no matter how clearly you followed the rules? Will your honesty destroy you, or will your truth trap you so tightly that even a lie feels like freedom? In ancient Greece, a young law student named Protagoras wanted to learn from a famous teacher. The teacher agreed to train him under one condition. The student would only have to pay for the lessons after he won his first court case. This sounded fair. It felt wise. It gave the student time. It respected the risk of teaching. So the student agreed. But after finishing his education, the student never took a case. He delayed. He avoided. Whether by fear or stubbornness, he never stepped into a courtroom. The teacher grew tired. He needed his payment. So he decided to sue his own student. Now, they were standing in court. Teacher against student, student against teacher. The very first case the student would ever face. And then the trap was revealed. The teacher argued, if I win this case, the student must pay me because the court has ordered it. But if I lose, he must still pay me because he will have won his first case. And that was the deal. The teacher believed that either outcome would guarantee payment, but the student replied, if I win, then the court has said I do not have to pay, and I follow the court. If I lose, then I still do not owe, because I have not yet won a case. So no matter what, I owe nothing. This is the paradox of the court. A legal riddle where both sides seem to win, and both sides seem to lose. A contract that turns in on itself and becomes a weapon for both hands. It is not a simple contradiction. It is a loop built from logic itself. The reason this paradox hurts the brain is because it is not about facts. It is about rules that apply to each other. The teacher's contract depends on an outcome that the court is supposed to decide. But the court's outcome now depends on how the contract was written. There is no fixed starting point. Each side uses the outcome to prove their side of the contract, and the contract uses each outcome to protect itself. The loop never ends. In real life, this kind of paradox shows up in workplace contracts. Imagine a job that says you will be evaluated after your first project. And your first project is designing the evaluation system itself. Any outcome you deliver becomes both proof and problem. The system uses your work to measure you and uses that measurement to judge your work. You are trapped inside a frame you cannot control. In relationships, it can feel the same. One person may say, I will trust you when you prove you are honest. But the other replies, I cannot prove I am honest unless you trust me first. It becomes a cycle. The need for proof becomes the very reason that proof is never given. Love waits for certainty that cannot appear without risk. The paradox of the court is often used in philosophy classes to show how legal reasoning can collapse when the system refers to itself. In logic, this is called self-reference. It is the same structure behind the liar paradox, where someone says, I am lying. If the sentence is true, then it must be false. If it is false, then it must be true. In court, this becomes dangerous because judges want finality. But this paradox shows that some arguments never truly end. They fold in on themselves and break the tools we use to settle disputes. In history, similar moments have appeared. During the Roman Republic, legal power often depended on interpretations of earlier rules. A politician could use a law to stop an opponent, but that same law could be turned around if the other side used a different interpretation. As laws grew, so did the complexity. Legal systems became less about justice and more about who controlled the language of rules. Courts stopped asking, "What is right?" and started asking, "What does the rule allow me to say?" The danger of this paradox is not only in logic, it is in trust. Systems that cannot solve problems start to feel like lies. People begin to think that all justice is manipulation, that every truth can be twisted, and once that feeling spreads, society cracks. Courts lose power, agreements lose meaning. People no longer believe that law can protect them. The paradox becomes a wound. Some versions of this paradox are still discussed in legal philosophy today. What counts as fulfillment of a contract? Can a condition that depends on future events be used to enforce the past? What happens when the act of enforcement becomes the first moment of the agreement's activation? These are not academic questions. They shape how governments make treaties, how companies write fine print, how families divide inheritance, how power is handed over without violence. If the conditions are unclear, then peace becomes fragile. And yet, the paradox of the court also teaches a strange lesson, that the clearest agreements are often the ones that cannot be gamed, that simplicity is not weakness, it is protection. When a deal leaves no room for circular logic, it protects both sides from traps. It removes the ability to twist justice into a weapon. In education, this is why teachers now use rubrics. In business, this is why contracts add timelines and clean conditions. In relationships, it is why people sometimes say, "We need to speak clearly, no more games." Because once the loop begins, once both sides think the other has already broken the rule, trust dies. And no court in the world can restore that kind of damage. The paradox of the court does not offer a winner. It does not have a solution that feels fair to both. That is why it has lived so long. Not because it is unsolved, but because it is a mirror that shows how law, logic, and loyalty can fold in on each other until none are left standing. Moore's Paradox. Moore's Paradox is one of the strangest ideas in philosophy, because it sounds completely wrong when you hear it, but it is not a logical contradiction. The paradox happens when someone says something like this: "It is raining outside, but I do not believe it is." That sentence feels wrong. It sounds like the person is confused or lying. But if you look closely, there is no actual contradiction in the sentence. It can be true that it is raining and that the person does not believe it. Still, saying it out loud sounds very strange. It is uncomfortable because we expect people to say things they believe. When someone makes a statement, we assume they think it is true. But in Moore's Paradox, the speaker says something is true and also says they do not believe it. That mismatch creates tension not in logic, but in communication. The paradox is named after the British philosopher G.E. Moore, who brought attention to this problem. He did not discover a contradiction in logic. He discovered something about how our minds work and how language expresses belief. The sentence, "It is raining, but I do not believe it is true," has no internal error. The weather could be what it is. The speaker could simply be mistaken or unaware. But when the speaker says both parts of the sentence together, something feels broken. Because the sentence tells you the truth, and then immediately removes belief in that truth. And that is not how people normally speak. To understand this better, think of belief like a bridge between your thoughts and your words. When someone says, "I believe it is raining," they are making a connection between what is happening and how they see it. But if they say, "It is raining," and I do not believe it, they break that connection. The sentence is not impossible, but it makes no sense as a statement coming from someone's mouth, because we expect belief and speech to match. Let us break it down with a simple real-world example. Imagine a friend walks into the room soaking wet. You look outside and see water on the road. You say to another person, "It is raining." That makes sense. Now imagine you say, "It is raining, but I do not believe it is." That sounds confusing. The person hearing you would probably ask what you mean. They would assume you made a mistake. But what if you were told by someone that it is raining, and you just repeated it out loud without truly believing it yourself? That could make your sentence logically true, but still emotionally and socially strange. Now picture a workplace situation. An employee reads out the results of a report and says, "Our profits are up this quarter, but I do not believe they are." That statement will confuse everyone in the room. It might even create distrust. The listeners would wonder why the person is presenting information they do not believe. This shows that Moore's paradox is not just about words. It is about how people trust what others say. It is about the link between knowledge and belief, and how we assume that when someone tells us something, they believe it. In families, this can appear in everyday moments. A parent might say, "I know you are a good child, but I do not believe you are telling the truth." That can sound hurtful or strange, because knowing and believing usually go together. When they are separated in speech, it feels unnatural. In relationships, someone might say, "I trust you, but I do not believe you love me." Again, the words are not logically false. The person can trust someone's actions while doubting their feelings. But the sentence brings discomfort because it puts belief and truth in two separate boxes. Philosophers have looked at Moore's paradox to understand more about belief. One idea is that belief is not just something in your mind, it is something you show when you speak. So when you say something, it is a sign to others that you believe it. If you say something and also say you do not believe it, the listener becomes unsure of how to respond. It breaks the normal rule of conversation. That rule is simple. If you say something, you believe it. Moore's paradox breaks that rule, but not logic itself. This paradox also shows up in personal thinking. People sometimes hold beliefs that clash with what they see. A person might think, "I am loved by my family, but I do not believe they care about me." This kind of thought is sad, but common. It is not a logical contradiction. The person may know the facts, but still feel emotional distance. Moore's paradox helps explain why such feelings are so painful, because the person lives with a gap between knowledge and belief. Another version of the paradox is, "I do not believe it is raining, but it is." The order of the sentence changes, but the confusion remains. The speaker says something is true, but also claims to lack belief. In logic, this is not impossible, but in human speech, it feels broken. The brain expects belief to follow truth. When it does not, trust becomes harder. In the modern world, this paradox becomes more visible through social media and public messaging. People repeat facts they do not fully believe because they are expected to say them. This creates a strange situation where language becomes separated from belief, and that leads to more confusion in society. Moore's paradox is important because it shows us where that confusion begins. Even in science, where truth and evidence matter most, belief plays a role. A scientist might report findings and also say, "I am unsure if I believe the results." That kind of statement must be handled carefully. It is not logically wrong, but it changes how people trust the message. The paradox teaches us that belief is not just private, it is social. When you speak, you invite others to share your thoughts. If your belief is missing, the message loses power. Moore's paradox helps us think more clearly about the connection between thought and speech. It reminds us that logic is not enough to build trust. You also need coherence between what you say and what you believe. When that connection is broken, the result may not be false, but it is unsettling. In the end, Morse paradox is not a mistake in grammar. It is a mirror showing how humans use language. It reveals the gap between knowing and believing, between what we say and what we feel. And it reminds us that the most powerful part of a sentence is not just the truth in the words, but the belief behind them. The paradox of self-amendment. The idea of rules, changing rules, sounds simple, but when you look deeper, it creates one of the most confusing and difficult puzzles in legal and logical thinking. This is the paradox of self-amendment. It happens when a rule or a law tries to change itself. At first, it sounds harmless. Governments and organizations change their rules all the time. But the paradox begins when a rule allows its own change in a way that could erase the very power it used to make the change. In simple words, it is like using your voice to remove your ability to speak. You used a rule to change a rule, but what if the new rule says the old one was never valid in the first place? Now you are caught in a loop. Did the rule really change? Or did you erase the part that gave you the right to change it in the first place? This idea is especially important in constitutional law. Most countries have a constitution that explains how laws are made and how they can be changed. Often, there is a section in the Constitution that says how the Constitution itself can be amended. This makes sense because over time, societies change. But what happens if a country uses that power to completely remove the rule that allows change? Or to rewrite it so that it now says something totally different? This is where the paradox becomes real. Because if you use the rules to destroy the rules, where do the new ones come from? A famous legal theorist, Peter Suber, explored this idea deeply. He showed that many legal systems can run into this problem. Imagine Rule A says you can change Rule B, but then someone adds a new Rule C that says Rule A was never valid. Now the system begins to break down, because Rule C depends on Rule A to exist. But Rule C also says Rule A should not exist. So now the system is both legal and illegal at the same time. A simple analogy would be a club that has a rule saying only current members can vote on new rules. One day, they vote to allow non-members to make changes too, but now, the very rule about who counts as a member is being changed by people who were not members when the rule was made. It makes everything unclear. Who has the real power, the old members or the new voters? In real life, this paradox appears during political crises. For example, if a government declares that it is changing the rules of elections, and that new rule also decides who can vote, then it can shape future power in a way that is self-serving. If the change benefits those already in charge, then the people may say the change was illegal, but the leaders will say it was legal because the law now says it was. This kind of circular reasoning makes it hard to know what is fair and what is manipulation. Another example is in company policies. A company might have a rule that only the board of directors can change the rules. One day, the board passes a rule that says the CEO can now change policies alone. Later, the CEO uses this new power to fire the board and change all the policies. The board then says this is not allowed because the rule that gave the CEO power came from them. But the CEO now says, according to the new rules, everything is fine. Again, the logic circles in on itself. This paradox also shows up in schools. Imagine a classroom where the teacher lets students vote on the grading system. They vote to remove the teacher's authority and set their own grades. Now the teacher is stuck. If the rule change is accepted, then they have no control. But if it is rejected, then the vote was meaningless. Both choices challenge the original authority. This is not just a legal or political problem, it reflects something deeper about how systems depend on trust. Rules work because people believe in them. If the rule that defines all other rules becomes unstable, the whole system can collapse. This is why constitutions often protect certain parts from being changed. These are called entrenched clauses. They exist to protect the foundation. But even then, clever leaders sometimes find ways to get around them. When that happens, the public begins to feel powerless. They see the rules as flexible for the powerful and fixed for everyone else. The paradox of self-amendment forces us to ask, where does real authority come from? Is it the words on paper? The vote of the people? The traditions that have always been followed? Or is it simply the side that has more control? When a rule changes itself in a way that questions its own origin, the system becomes like a snake eating its own tail. In some ways, this paradox also connects to personal identity. People often say things like, "I am changing who I am." But can the person you are today truly erase the version of you that existed yesterday? Can you really rewrite your past beliefs and choices by simply declaring a new version of yourself? If you say, "I am no longer the kind of person who did those things," are you making a real change, or just editing the story? In science, this kind of self-reference leads to similar problems. In computer programming, for example, a program that edits itself can become unstable. If the code that changes the code breaks, then the system may collapse. In artificial intelligence, this is why safety protocols are important. You do not want a machine that can rewrite its own ethical limits without supervision. The paradox of self-amendment teaches us that unchecked self-editing can lead to chaos. In families, a parent might say, "From now on, there are no rules." But that statement itself is a rule. It claims to erase the structure while creating a new one. The child might feel confused. Are we free, or are we following a new kind of control? The contradiction is real. It makes trust difficult. This paradox reminds us that power is not only about control, it is also about limits. When systems forget how they were built, they lose their shape. When rules erase the rulebook, the game becomes meaningless. That is why the strongest systems are the ones that know how to grow without losing their roots. They adapt carefully. They leave the foundation untouched. They do not allow change to destroy the logic of change itself. The paradox of self-amendment is not just a legal puzzle. It is a warning, a reminder that the rules we depend on must not destroy the power that made them work. Because when rules eat themselves, fairness disappears. And when fairness disappears, trust does not come back easily. The unexpected hanging paradox. The mind can feel calm one moment and completely unsettled the next when it tries to solve a puzzle that does not want to be solved. The unexpected hanging paradox is one of those puzzles. It begins with a simple statement and ends in total confusion. It is not just a trick of words. It is a deeper challenge to how we understand time, surprise, and prediction. It shakes the idea that you can prepare for everything if you are clever enough. And it quietly reveals that some things can only happen because you believe they will not. The paradox starts with a judge who tells a prisoner something unusual. He says, "You will be hanged at noon on one weekday next week, but the day will be a surprise. You will not know the day of the hanging until the morning it happens." The prisoner thinks hard. He wants to figure it out. He starts by thinking about Friday. He says to himself, "If I am not hanged by Thursday, then it must be Friday. But if it must be Friday, then it will not be a surprise. So it cannot be Friday." He then thinks about Thursday. "If it is not Friday, and I am still here by Wednesday night, then it must be Thursday. But again, if I know that, then Thursday is not a surprise. So it cannot be Thursday either." He keeps going backward. Using the same logic, he removes Wednesday, then Tuesday, and then Monday. He concludes that the hanging cannot happen at all. He feels relieved. He thinks the judge must be wrong. But then something strange happens. On Wednesday, guards come to his cell at noon. He is completely shocked. He is not ready. The hanging is real, and it is a surprise. That is the paradox. The prisoner used perfect logic to prove the event would not happen, but the logic itself made the surprise possible. This situation breaks something deep in our thinking. The prisoner believed that if he could predict the day, then the surprise would disappear. So if he could remove every day through logic, the hanging could not happen. But the problem is that by trying to predict it, he created the very conditions for being surprised. The paradox shows that trying too hard to know something might be the reason you fail to know it. Let us break it down in simpler terms. Imagine a teacher tells her students there will be a surprise test next week. The students begin to guess. They say it cannot be on Friday because we will know by then. Then they remove Thursday, then Wednesday, and finally all the days. They relax. But when the test happens on Tuesday, everyone is shocked. They were sure it could not happen, but it did. The test was real, and it was unexpected. This paradox is not just a classroom puzzle. It appears in real life when people try to outsmart uncertainty. In science, researchers often make predictions based on data. They try to guess when something will happen. But if their predictions are too rigid, they miss unexpected changes. The paradox reminds scientists that uncertainty is not always something you can remove with better thinking. Sometimes the act of trying to predict creates blind spots. In relationships, people want to feel secure. They ask for clear promises. They try to predict what their partner will do. But relationships do not always follow logic. Someone might say, "I will surprise you with a gift next week." The other person might try to guess the day. If they overthink it, they might spoil the moment. But if they let go, the surprise feels real. The paradox teaches that trying to control a surprise often destroys it. Trust and mystery go together in human connection. In workplaces, leaders sometimes try to catch problems early. They make strict systems to avoid surprises, but sometimes the surprise comes because people stopped expecting it. A worker might think nothing bad can happen because every risk has been calculated, but then something breaks in a way no one expected. The surprise comes not because people were careless, but because they were too confident in their planning. Even in families, this paradox appears. A parent might say there will be a consequence for bad behavior, but the child will not know when. The child tries to guess. They think if they are good all week, nothing will happen. But then the consequence arrives on a day they did not expect. The lesson feels stronger because it broke through their prediction. Philosophers love this paradox because it shows how logic can work against itself. It is not a mistake in thinking. It is a result of thinking too deeply in a place where thinking cannot help. The logic is valid, but the conclusion is false. That is why the paradox is so powerful. It shows that some events are true only if you do not believe they are. The unexpected hanging paradox is used to explain the limits of self-referential systems. A self-referential system is something that talks about itself. In this case, the hanging is a surprise only if the prisoner does not expect it. But if he expects it, then it is not a surprise. So the only way it can happen is if he believes it will not happen. That loop creates the confusion. It shows that human belief is part of the system, not outside of it. In psychology, this paradox connects to how people experience surprise and fear. Anticipation changes how we feel about future events. If you expect something scary, it might feel less scary when it comes. But if you think it cannot happen, and it does, the emotional shock is greater. This is why surprises can feel more intense when people have convinced themselves they are safe. The paradox is not just a mind trick, it is a real emotional experience. Now let us return to the prisoner. His logic was sharp, his thinking was careful, but it made him unprepared. He believed he solved the problem, but the solution was what made the outcome real. The guards walked in, the event happened, and the surprise was total. This is the lesson. Some things are only possible because you stopped believing in them. That is what makes them powerful. That is what makes them unexpected. The moment the guards enter the prisoner's cell, the paradox turns from theory into reality. All his careful thinking collapses in that 1 second. He is surprised. deeply. Even though he believed it was impossible, his logic was solid. Every step made sense. But the final result did not match the world. That feeling, the gap between what we expect and what happens, is what makes the unexpected hanging paradox so powerful. It is not just about philosophy. It is about how humans live with uncertainty and belief. The prisoner's error was not in the logic. It was in the assumption that logic can control every situation. He believed that if he reasoned hard enough, he could eliminate surprise. But surprise depends on not knowing. The moment you believe you can remove all uncertainty, you step into the heart of the paradox. Because that confidence is what creates the surprise you never saw coming. This happens more often in life than we notice. Picture a company that spends months preparing for a product launch. Every test is done. Every failure is imagined and prevented. The leaders believe they have covered everything. But on the launch day, a small unexpected glitch shuts everything down. The team is shocked, not because they were lazy, but because they were too sure of their own plan. The paradox was sitting inside their confidence. It waited. Then it struck. In families, a parent might promise their child that if rules are broken, a punishment will come at a random time. The child thinks hard. They try to figure out the most likely day. They begin to believe that if they guess carefully, they will always be safe. But then, when the consequence happens at a moment they stopped worrying, they are surprised. And that surprise is not about fear. It is about trust being tested. The child believed the pattern they created in their head was stronger than the promise. But it was not. This paradox is also a tool used in military strategy. When one side wants to launch an attack, the greatest advantage is often surprise. If the enemy thinks too hard about when it might happen, they might believe they have ruled out all possible times. That belief can be used against them. They lower their guard, and the unexpected action succeeds. History is full of moments when overthinking opened the door for real disaster. In science, the unexpected hanging paradox teaches something deeper about observation. It shows that when you are part of the system you are trying to predict, your thoughts can change the outcome. The prisoner could only be surprised because he thought he could not be surprised. That makes the event possible. The same is true in some interpretations of quantum physics. Observation affects reality. Thinking you know something might change what actually happens. This paradox also speaks to a more personal truth. In our own minds, we try to control the future. We make plans. We make backup plans. We try to stay ready for every possible event. But sometimes, life finds the one moment we stopped guarding. That is when it strikes. A breakup, a job loss, a sudden illness. The surprise is painful, not just because it happens, but because we believed we were safe. We believed we saw it all. But the paradox lives in that space between certainty and shock. Emotionally, this paradox feels like betrayal. You told yourself a story. You believed in your thinking, and then life showed you that belief was incomplete. That kind of surprise feels different from any other kind. It is not just about what happened. It is about what you thought could never happen. And when it does, you feel exposed. That emotional sting is the real power behind the unexpected hanging paradox. In philosophy, some thinkers use this paradox to argue that knowledge has limits, that there are truths that cannot be known in advance. Not because they are hidden, but because the act of trying to know them changes them, like trying to catch a shadow by stepping into the light. The moment you move toward it, it moves away. The more certain you are, the deeper the surprise cuts. Others say the paradox is a warning against the illusion of control, that people who believe they can think their way out of every outcome will always be caught off guard. That the smartest minds can sometimes be the most vulnerable to this kind of surprise because they believe so strongly in their predictions. It also teaches something simple but important, that not all surprises are mistakes. Some surprises are part of how the world works. Some events must catch you off guard to be meaningful. A proposal, a gift, a gesture of kindness from someone you gave up on. These moments only matter because you did not see them coming. The unexpected hanging paradox reminds us that some of the best and worst parts of life live outside of logic. In therapy and psychology, this paradox is used to show people how control and certainty can become traps. A person who always tries to avoid pain might find themselves hurt by something they thought they had fully planned. A person who avoids risk might be shocked by loss anyway. The paradox shows that the effort to remove surprise sometimes becomes the reason it hits harder. Now think back to the prisoner. His failure was not in being wrong. It was in needing to be right too much. He thought that knowing everything would protect him, but it made him blind. When the guards walked in, it was not just the sentence that landed. It was the realization that he had misunderstood how surprise works. That realization is what the paradox truly delivers. The unexpected hanging paradox is not just about a puzzle or a twist. It is a reflection of human nature, the desire to understand, the fear of uncertainty, the pain of being caught off guard, and the strange truth that sometimes not knowing is the only way for something to truly happen. It teaches you that surprise is not always the enemy, that expecting everything leaves no space for change, and that sometimes the most unexpected moment is the one that opens your eyes the most. This is why the paradox stays with us, not because it has an answer, but because it shows us that some things are only real when we stop looking for them. And in that silence, when the logic ends and the moment begins, we are reminded what it means to be truly surprised. And that's it. Hope you're in peace. Just consider subscribing because sleep matters. Just then, stress scatters and nothing else matters, right? Peace out.